Okay, so we are live. How's it going, Sean?
Good. Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me. Of
Appreciate you taking the time.
course.
If you can just maybe spend a minute or so to just introduce yourself, and let people know kind of who you are in the collectible space. Sean, for those who don't know, he has a YouTube channel called Reserved Investments that you can find. Please go and subscribe and support him and watch his videos and do all that good stuff and comment. Sean loves I think is someone who definitely has strong opinions like me, but is open for discussion and hearing other viewpoints and kind of enjoys the back and forth. So definitely go check him out and feel free to share your opinions. But the plan tonight, before having you kind of give a little more background on who you are and what your
Mhm.
experience is, the plan tonight, guys, mainly, I really want to open it up for questions for you guys to have a chance to live kind of ask Sean your questions about the Pokemon space, about the pop culture collectible space. I will definitely help kind of fill in some of the data and the blanks here and there with like very specifics on the Pokemon market. Sean does Pokemon, but he also it is more kind of a broad, even more people here know that I collect 100 different things as well and follow many markets as well. But that Pokemon is sort of my main focus and the market that I know the best. Sean, follows many different markets and does well, I'll let you take it away, but he does writing for I forget auction news.
Antiques and auction news.
Yeah,
Yes.
it takes an auction news, and but I'll let you give an intro, and then we'll get started with questions.
Sure. Well, my full name is Sean Cermick. I live outside of Philadelphia in a small town called Boyertown, Pennsylvania, which is where I grew up. I've been involved in the antiques and collectibles trade literally since the age of 12. I was lucky because of my proximate location where I live, where I grew up. I'm very near to Adamstown. For those unaware, Adamstown, Pennsylvania is billed as the antiques capital of the US, pretty much. So a lot of trading goes on there. So from a very early age, I was able to learn firsthand how the antiques and collectibles markets work. And I was always fascinated with the finance side because I'm also interested in business, finance, economics, and investing. So as I got older and I started to learn from some top collectors, top dealers in these markets, I saw that there really is a disconnect between how collectors and speculators view these markets and how people who are attempting to truly invest in these markets look at these markets from a holistic standpoint. So literally about 2012, 2013, I got asked, I forget how it played out. I was really big on eBay and I kind of got pulled into writing at that particular time eBay guides. And eBay guides were a thing. I don't think they're a thing anymore. I started writing guides on everything from storage war auctions to collecting video games to rare coins, whatever it was. And that led to me getting a gig writing for Antiques and Auction News. And I just started sharing my advice on pretty much the investment side of the antiques and collectibles trade. And it started to pull me in a different direction where people started reaching out to me asking for my help investing or collecting or how to become better prepared for how these markets work from a financial perspective. So I started a consulting business. From there, it grew. In 2019, I started to do eBay. I did not expect my eBay channel to take off. Ironically, it did pretty much take off, fueled by what happened with graded video games. That entire market crash kind of put me front and center because I was featured on, if you guys seen it, the Carl Jopes video, where he talked about a lot of games and the controversies therein. And pretty much it's been an interesting climb ever since. I will say that. So that pretty much sums up my work in a nutshell.
I guess the first question I have for you is what markets do you follow and what do you kind of buy and collect? And are there certain areas that you focus more in, or is it sort of very broad and you do almost every pop culture hobby?
I pretty much look at almost every market that has a viable pulse or a viable secondary market in the entire antiques and collectibles trade. Let me give you some examples. All the way up from high end art, Hermes Birkin bags, Rolex watches, all the way down through collectible card games, sports cards, video games, rare coins, currency, historical documents, vintage toys. Even Funko Pops, I do monitor the market for the speculative stuff, even though as much as you guys that know my channel, I don't recommend investing in it, of course, but I do monitor all these markets. I'm passionate more. I consider myself a unique breed. I'm very passionate towards a lot of the things that you guys probably collect, whether it be vintage toys, video games, Pokemon, Magic the Gathering, all that stuff. But when I invest, I tend to invest, if I'm going to invest in pop culture, I tend to go after the more rare or hard to find pieces, along with rare coins, currency, historical documents, traditional antiques, edged weapons, firearms, certain pieces of art, because those have always been taught to me. And we can look at this from the numbers, the better investments over the long term. Now, if we're talking about just speculating, I do get involved in some of the modern pieces. You guys watch my channel, you know I have tons of video games usually in my background, occasionally Pokemon, occasionally Magic the Gathering, but I am involved in these markets from both standpoints. It's just for different reasons.
So what do within Pokemon and Magic the Gathering, for example, how do you speculate in those markets? How do you tend to speculate?
Sure, that's a great question. Well, first, I am holding in my personal collection, I do have vintage WotC era PSA 10 Pokemon cards from the coveted era. So I do have some of those pieces sitting in the safety deposit box that I consider to be, even in this day and age, a fairly good long term hold because the demographics are there for Pokemon. So I do want to state that because I kind of get pulled into this rift where somehow I'm against Pokemon or I'm against pop culture entirely. I'm not. It's just you have to use precaution and always have to have your fingers on the pulse if you are investing in pop culture compared to antiques because the markets are more volatile. They're more speculative. If a price spike comes and I'm ready to cash out, I will take advantage of it more in pop culture than that of antiques. Now, with what you're asking, I do speculate. It's not consistent, but I will buy into certain products, mainly factory sealed booster boxes and cases of Pokemon product that I think are going to have potential,
Mm.
mainly potential over the short term. I'm not looking to hold this stuff for 10, 15, 20 years. I'm looking to flip it preferably in 3 to 5, if not less.
Hmm. And do you think that will be a repeatable that you'll be able to continue to buy and flip every 3 to 5 years, or do you view it as like right now that's the way the market is, but it won't always be that way? How do you think about these markets?
I continue to reassess because the pop culture market's always changing, right? At one particular point in time, I hate to use this as an example because I know your audience is going to cut me up, but Beanie Babies and Pez were once collectibles that you could potentially speculate in and invest in. Now, I get it. The demographics for Pokemon are much stronger, but all pop culture collectibles, even comic books, whatever it is, they move across a predictable tangent. And that line is usually infinite. I'm sorry, not infinite. It usually has an end point in time where it's going to end, whatever we're looking at. If we go back to the 50s, if we go back to the 60s, people were relating on Schwinn bicycles, whole Lionel train sets. It's all at some point there is an end that is coming for all of this stuff. Even Batman and Superman are not infinite as much as people think they are. And I love comic books.
So okay, so do you when things like when you buy a product, so that you name two things that you sort of bought. So we're talking,
Mhm.
PSA 10, maybe first edition WotC hollows. You're talking about Wizards of the Coast hollows, sort of those high end things, and you view those as long-term potential investments. And when you say that, is that, do you think those are going to compete with something like a stock market? Is it worth investing and talking about that in the same category as that? Or is it, well, I like these, I think they're cool, I think they're fun to have, and I think that of the things in the hobby, those do have some chance or more of a chance. How do you gauge sort of the risk reward on something like that, and also the fact that you like enjoy them? I would guess part of why you have them.
Oh, yeah, I have an emotional attachment to this stuff too. I'm just able to control it better than most people. That's
Mm.
how I don't get caught up into the hype. I will tell you though, to answer your question, I think when we compare collectibles to the stock market, a lot of assumptions have to be made because these are speculative assets. At the end of the day, there are no cash flows. There's really nothing that you can look at for a collectible that compares it to an index fund or even a stock that pays a substantial dividend. It's not the same in that perspective because you can read the 10K report. You can look at debt to asset ratios. You can look at inventory turnover, sales predictions, forecasts, look at what market they're in. There's a ton of analytical work you can do on the stock side, the financial side. So when I look at collectible investments, to me, it's better to diversify away from financial assets to invest in collectibles if you are comfortable with that and that's something you want to do. So I look at them as running in tandem. This is why on my channel, I always say you cannot put all your money in Pokemon or Magic the Gathering or video games or even rare coins or even high-end art. The way you do it is you diversify in, and you have to have a risk reward tolerance that you're comfortable with. Do I think that certain collectibles can compete over the short term with certain stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETFs, and the like? Absolutely. Over the long term is where it gets very murky. For instance, let me use this as an example. If I were to tell you or ask you, can you tell me what the S&P 500 is going to close on tomorrow, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time when the stock market closes? I guarantee you nobody here would be able to predict that. However, can we all agree that within 6 months, Pokemon, because it's popular now, is still going to be popular 6 months from now? The answer is yes. So when we look at antiques and collectibles, where am I going with this? 10 years from now, I can tell you if you put money in an S&P 500 index fund, 10 to 20 years long term, you're most likely going to make money. As a matter of fact, there's studies out there that show something like 98% of all people, even if you put money in the day before the financial crisis occurred, today in the year 2023, with a pullback in the market, you're still up tremendously. I mean, you've literally 3 to 4 times your money in that particular span of time with an S&P 500 index fund still. Now, if I tell you, if you're going to invest in Pokemon, whether it's vintage or modern, 20 years from now, 10, 20 years from now, can you guarantee me it's going to go up in value and it's going to compete with an S&P 500 index fund? I would say no. There's no guarantee that that is going to occur. That's why over the long term, usually financial assets are the better investment. Are there people that get lucky? There's always the guy, right, that was ahead of the curve back in 1968. He was going to newsstands. He was buying comic books. He kept them in mint condition. He kept them somewhere safe. And literally, he kept them for 30, 40 years. And now today, he's doing great if he chooses to sell. Most people, though, are not ahead of the curve in that dimension, meaning most people are not able to do that simply because it's more difficult to do today in the year 2023 because everybody's doing this stuff. If you go on YouTube, you go on TikTok, there's a million different people giving you advice, what collectibles to buy, what to put away, what's going to be worth money in the future. Younger individuals who are wary of the stock market, collectibles have a lower barrier to entry, so they're all investing in this stuff. And that's what makes this even more difficult. Because if people are going to hoard this stuff, you got to remember 10 to 20 years from now, there's going to be more of this readily available. And that's the problem.
Yeah, I think that when I try to invest in these markets, I try to be the person who collected Action Comics 1 before anyone cared about it, basically, is the way I think about it. I try to identify IPs and items within those IPs and things that seem very undervalued and seem to have some of the fundamentals that an item like that has. Now, of course, it's very difficult to find items that have all of those characteristics. And frankly, because collectibles over the last 50 years have become such big money,
Yep.
those types of things do not exist anymore. Because even within Pokemon, for example, there's so much more of it. People kept it in way better condition than anything like Action Comics #1. A lot more printed originally than Action Comics 1 and far less attrition. And so when we look at your PSA 10, right, first edition, WotC Hollows, for example, first of all, we're relying on condition rarity and not just absolute rarity to create some sort of rarity, which I want to ask your opinion on. Sort of, is that enough? Is a sort of condition rarity enough to make something investable, or or should you look more to absolute rarity? And then, your point about I very much agree with everything you said, and I feel that I guess my question is that when we're in an online space where everyone is sort of investing and having these discussions all the time, who's everyone going to sell to? I mean, yes, future kids, all of us may end up putting more money in over time. We all, when you talk about demographics, it's like we'll get older, my generation will have maybe more expendable income. Maybe our kids will collect and our kids have kids, and you'll have multiple generations, like these types of theories. But how much of that is already priced in, right now in the prices, that sort of bullishness that, this is the type of thing that I think about. And then is enough of that priced in that it doesn't make sense really to think about these as investments at the moment. Um, but I guess it depends on your timeline, and I guess it depends on really how you define, how good does an investment need to be for it to reasonably, be called an investment. Um, uh, those are the things that I think about. Even the stuff you talk about that I feel like is the best stuff in the hobby in terms of the most historic, the cornerstones. I think where I become even more concerned and want to hear your thoughts on. So there are cards from 2013, 2016, for example, let's say, that have 500, 1,000, 2,000 PSA 10s already and are selling for $5,000, $2,000, $3,000. When we talk about these WotC first edition PSA 10 hollows, we're talking about cards that are selling. Some of them are selling in that range. Many others are selling 600, 1,000,
Correct.
1,500. And the pops are more like 100, 200, 300. And they've been, graded for a lot longer, these types of things. One theory that's going on in the market now is that people just don't like the old stuff. People won't like the old stuff going forward. People want the newer stuff. They want the full arts. They want these middle era things. Even if there are more of them, they still should be a higher price and are going to be a higher price in the future. I want to get your thoughts on those dynamics. I'm not sure if you're aware of some of these cards. Some examples are like Pikachu, Japanese Pikachu promos. Uh, the alt arts, rainbow rares, full arts haven't reached those types of price points yet, but they may. Um, you know, uh, what are your thoughts on that part of the market, singles? And then I want to ask you more about the sealed, and that you are investing or I don't know if you're going to use the word investing, but you're short term investing or 3 to 5 years speculating. Yeah, I mean, um, I speculate on sealed modern product myself. I sell it right away when it goes up, and I'd like to hear, does that make sense, or should you hold it 3 to 5 years, or kind of
Well, I
really.
can answer that right now. It's best to sell it when it goes up, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
I mean, my thing, and I get into some debates with people in this community because people will buy a box and then it will quadruple in value or triple in value or double in value, and they still think it's good to hold, or they still think it's a good investment, or they're buying more, or they're buying in at those higher prices. That's what I'm uncomfortable with in that sort of area. But these things are very hard to. It's hard to predict these things, and there's a lot of moving parts. So I just said a lot. Feel free to kind of take any part of that you'd like. Maybe starting with sort of those Pikachu promos, those like more expensive raw cards that maybe are a little bit aren't as old, aren't as rare, but are a higher price than some of the original stuff. And then maybe a little bit of the sealed. We can go into that.
Well, we can compare this to comic book collecting in a way, can't we? I mean, in this day and age, isn't golden age and silver age where the money is? You can argue that bronze age comics have come a
Mhm.
far way. Doesn't mean that bronze age comics are worthless. But if you look at the population reports,
Mhm.
there's very few bronze age comic books from that era, the 1970s. Just to use that as an example, if somebody doesn't know what I mean when I say Bronze Age of comic books, it's pretty much the 1970s. Let's be
Mhm.
honest. If I were to invest in those particular books, I honestly would only go after several key issues from that era, simply because there's a plethora of them readily available. You can call up any comic book dealer right now, any of the top tier dealers, Greg Reeves, Bob Storms, any of these guys. And if you want like a giant size X-Men 1, an Incredible Hulk 181, which I have in my collection, I love it, or an Amazing Spider-Man 129, they can get it to you in high grade within a week, literally in most cases. If not, they probably already have it in inventory. So to me, that's not the true definition of a good investment. Can you make money on it? Can it go up in value? Absolutely. There's people that made a ton of money who sold into the hype during the wonderful COVID bubble that we had, where collectible prices were hitting all-time highs. There's people that went in their collections and they sold it. So what does this have to do with Pokemon? Pokemon's very similar in those dynamics, especially with the younger generations that are gravitating towards it. I honestly believe all the vintage stuff that was produced in the WotC era is going to be a better investment because people are going to want to own the true history of Pokemon if they're going to want to own Pokemon. It's no different than people today covet Golden Age comic books. I want a Detective Comics 27, an Action Comics 1, Batman 1, Superman 1. All those books are more coveted. Now, you do bring up an interesting point, an interesting development here, where obviously as Pokemon went along, they've evolved, they've learned what sells, and the collecting base, the overall community, has drawn a liking to some of these particular products. And I liken that to what's happening in certain Copper Age and Modern Era comic books, like your Amazing Spider-Man 300s, first appearance of Venom. There's close to 2,000 in 9.8 condition on the census. At one time, that book was nearing or ready to hit. I think it did actually $10,000.
I
Today,
think what's tricky for me, Sean, is that I get that logically because it's Venom and it's the first appearance of Venom. And Venom is a top 3 character in terms of in terms of money in the collectible hobbies right now, or certainly top 5.
Sure.
But why is the 30th appearance of Pikachu because it's full art? And my answer is something like this, Sean, and then I want to hear you respond. Apologize for cutting you off.
You're fine.
Um, uh, is that people say I like the art better. It's more it's so what full arts are in Pokemon. The WotC, they used to have just
Yep.
the square and then the text, and now it's art on the whole card. And because there's art on the whole card, it's better. And that to me is the only sort of argument or reason that I can think of why these might sell for so much. They're not the releases aren't particularly important or historic. The order, having the Pokemon that's been on 100, 50 to 100 cards already, it's not a first appearance, it's not a rookie, it's so what do you and can you think of things maybe in other hobbies where that happened or has happened? Because I think Venom is a great one, and I think we can look in sports, right? With rookie classes and how rookie cards do, and all these types of things. But at least for these things, there's some of that logic because it's like, well, Venom's my favorite character. It's my favorite character. I want the first appearance of Venom, and at least right now, I'm not saying that comic book is correctly priced, but at least right now, that is my grail, and it makes sense from a sort of fundamental collector perspective. That's the thing I want the most. I have a little bit more of a hard time with like the subjectiveness of quality of art. I guess I'll give you my opinion, and I guess I'm very in the comic book world, what people liked has really shifted from generation to generation. I'm sure you could talk a little bit about that. How sort of there were alternate art comics, and there was lots of kind of crazy art in the 80s and 90s, and different versus sort of like more kind of like vintage simple style that became very popular, and then people went back to sort of that wanting more of that vintage style. So what do you make of all of that?
I honestly think, well, first of all, there are other collecting categories that we can compare this to. Even antiques, believe it or not. You can
Great.
compare this to rare coins.
Great.
But believe it or not, you can get classic gold coins from like the early 1900s for literally just a few $1,000s in certain
Mhm.
instances, in literally uncirculated condition, graded by a top tier grading company.
Mhm.
Well, when you look what certain like Walking Liberty halves are going for, or Morgan silver dollars, or peace dollars, some of these coins, you look at the population report, you look at the grade, there's a lot out there. Even the Carson City Mint
Mhm.
releases of Morgan silver dollars, they were used to be considered the blue chip of if you were going
Mhm.
to invest in a Morgan silver dollar, you had to get a Carson City. Okay. Now,
Mhm.
some are better than others because there's the GSA hoard. There's other releases that were flushed into the market at a later date because they were sitting in a treasury vault. I get that. But if you look at the prices of some of these just silver coins that were minted in the 1920s, 1930s, some of them are selling for more than gold coins of just like 20, 30 years prior. It makes no sense. And you wonder what is propelling this market in this manner? And really, what it is it's collectors that have more of an attachment to a peace dollar or a Morgan silver dollar or a Liberty half dollar because they went to the bank when they were growing up or their grandfather gave them that coin and now they have an emotional attachment to it. So now they want to go into the market and they're willing to pay more for those coins, even if you tell them you can get a scarcer issue that's not made of silver, but made out of gold for literally the same price. They don't care.
Mhm.
And that's just one dynamic where we can look at a collecting market. We can see that it's not always the rarest. It's not always the item that you think is going to go up in value and hit new highs or be the best investment. Now, it's kind of weird that I'm sitting here comparing coins, which is a very mature and sophisticated market, to that of Pokemon, which is extremely speculative. But it does fit. You can do the same thing with video games. What was the first video game? Now, again, this was a major speculative bubble, we know. What was the first graded video game to hit over $1 million? It wasn't Super Mario Brothers. It wasn't an Atari release. It
Mhm.
was Super Mario 64, released for the Nintendo 64 in late
Mhm.
1995.
I think though that it's like there's still logic to it all. It's like with the coins, it's like, well, people want American. They want to they're not interested in coins from across the world. They want the
Me too.
American coins, right? People want with the Venom I talked about, it's the first appearance of Venom. With the um sorry, what was the other example you just gave? Video games. With the video games, people have a connection. People who are buying and collecting a lot right now in our generation had much more of a connection to N64, right? So now there are people who argue that people today who are collecting Pokemon don't have a connection to WotC. They didn't collect WotC. They don't care about WotC.
Fair point.
They're going to care about this era. They're going to care about the middle era. You know, these types of arguments. It's a little hard for me to get there yet in the Pokemon hobby because first of all, I think a lot of the people who are saying this, they grew up in the WotC era, and I'm not sure. And I actually do think, I think they're kind of hyping whatever. That's a whole separate thing. Like I'm not sure that they're being genuine with some of those opinions. But the people who are and who like really either they're younger, like I know some 20-year-olds who are into Pokemon right now who just don't have an affinity or care that much about WotC. I know there are people who um um but they've known these items for a year, for 6 months, for 2 years, for 2.5 years. They didn't collect these items when they were kids. They're not first appearances. They're not they're not obvious key historical like for me, it's like, well, the N64, it's like, well, that was the game that you played when you were a kid, and it was your favorite game. And N64 in many ways was a massive historic sort of step forward. Now, will the alt arts of today be that someday? And will be this sort of like massive step forward in Pokemon and people will remember collecting the alt arts and enjoying the alt arts? Absolutely it could, right?
Correct.
but but how can it already be that? And are people just sort of pricing in today the speculation that that's going to happen because they're trying to make money? How can that already happen? That's when I have a hard time getting my mind around. Whereas when I hear the N64 and I hear these things, all these things I think are in a speculative bubble to some. I think collecting is and I think that there's and I judge that by I just think that it's just filled with a lot of people trying to kind of like make money and flip
Yeah.
and resell, at this point. But and I think even items that have a lot of like strong fundamentals can still be in a bubble, at the moment, or be
Oh,
way, way,
absolutely.
way overvalued, of course. But I guess that's where I struggle. That people kind of there's so much of that future sort of like what are people going to want in the future? What are people that people are just already pricing all that in? So what do you make of that within the Pokemon market? And maybe if you can compare that, like when you talk about the coin market, do you feel like that's what's driving some of those US coins? Is people speculating on them, or is it just people prefer American coins because that they're American currency collectors? Or in comic book world, what's going on with Venom? You think people are speculating on that, or are people collecting that, and it's sort of natural collectability? There's enough demand to keep up that supply, and with the N64, sort of same thing. How do you make sense of this?
Well, first, I do think when we look at the comic book market, obviously the rare coin market is a given in this. And also even the video game market, there is organic collectability there. Make no mistake. If I start talking about Funko Pops or Beanie Babies, Pogs, Pez, a lot of that stuff is very speculative and a lot of it utilizes mass produced scarcity.
Mhm.
So I do want to clarify that. When we talk about coins, comic books, even Pokemon to a certain extent, there is organic collectability there, meaning this stuff isn't going to go to zero per se, like everybody hopes. Like I remember back in the day in the 90s when people collected Beanie Babies, there was literally, it was almost like a light switch went off. Everybody was gung ho, everybody was investing in it. Then, literally, over the course of several weeks, the market just cratered.
So
And it
weird.
was like you had something that was worth $100. Now you can't get $5 for it.
Yeah.
And everybody was going, complaining, pitchforks drawn, torches out. Well, how did this happen? And it's like they couldn't see the forest through the trees. So, an earlier point you made that I do want to respond to, a speculative bubble in any market. It can happen in any market. It doesn't matter if it's Pokemon, rare coins, whatever it is. Those markets can last decades in certain cases. So it's not always clear cut to see it when it appears.
Mhm.
Others are more obvious than usual. Like if we look at what happened with Great at Video Games, a lot of us were able to easily look at that from a holistic standpoint, standing back, not getting involved, going, this is not organic at all. Somebody's behind the scenes priming the pump here. And that's literally what happened, in my opinion, and a lot of other people's opinions. And that's why there's a court case that's coming to trial soon to try to look into what happened there if there was kind of alleged manipulation, which personally I think there was. So
Yeah.
to answer your question, 2020 hindsight in the antiques and collectibles trade is a great thing to have, isn't it? It's always easy to like sit here and go, oh, it's 2023. Man, I wish 20 years ago I would have bought into this market. And if you were a collector back then, I got to ask, okay, why didn't you? Why didn't you go down that path and explore that collecting hobby? Why didn't you buy into those items? When we look forward, the one thing I usually tell people is all these markets are going to fundamentally change over time. I think there's better bets to put in your proverbial inventory or investment portfolio if you're buying for the long term. And there's bets that are more speculative. And there's items you can buy that probably, in my assessment, aren't going to do as well as others. But again, it's 2020 hindsight looking back. There are certain fundamentals you can use to gauge these markets. At least that's what I use. And I've been very lucky, very successful doing that. I try to teach that in my channel. But overall, no one could have predicted like the rise in, I'll use this as an example, talking about comic books, the rise in certain Bronze Age comics that really popped over the last few years. Because if you go back to the 1960s, believe it or not, the late 1960s, people were collecting comic books. The first Overstreet comic book price guide was published in 1970. If you
Mhm.
talk to any dealer, he'll tell you of that era, a lot of people were speculating on comic books. Again, if they were able to hold and they were able to send those books in for grading today, they made a lot of money. But how many people really bought right, was able to hold them for 20, 30, 40 years throughout each move, throughout each subsequent life event or life tragedy, and then pull them out in the same condition that they bought them, send them in to get graded, and capitalize off that? It's very few individuals. Let's be realistic. It's not like everybody has this stuff, everybody's making a ton of money. It's not. That's why when people talk about investing in collectibles, the thing that I always tell them is show me where all these multimillionaires investing in antiques and collectibles that got their money solely from investing in antiques and collectibles. Show me where these individuals are. There's very few when you look at it from that standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, mathematically, it's like the Pokemon company is taking a lot of money out. eBay is taking a lot of money out. All the auction houses, PSA.
Correct.
So for every $1,000,000 I'm making also, it has to come
Mhm.
from someone. It gets into this little bit of the greater fool situation where it's sort of like so many people are making a lot of money. How is that even a sustainable thing? And then yes, there's these arguments. Well, multi generations, and then there are just so many more collectors. Let's say there are just so many collectors
Correct.
that they can sustain 1,000 of me or something, or 1,000 of us or whatever. Kind of like doing our thing constantly, and prices can kind of like still go up. It's it's just I just have a hard time believing, and maybe I'm foolish, for it, but that people are buying $1,000, $2,000 items with no, oh, I don't care about the money. I don't care if it goes up. I just like it. I have a hard time with that.
I
Um,
agree with you.
but because that's just so not in my nature. But could it be in someone's nature theoretically, or a group of people's nature? Now, obviously, everything also has to do with how much money you have, right? Because $2,000 for someone who has $10 million is a very different, impact on their life than someone with 100 grand or 5 grand, or these or that. But when we look at something like Pokemon, I mean, could it be richer sort of investor, speculators buying up a lot of this who do have a lot of money and are able to? But when I go into the math, I mean, we're talking about modern cards that have a $40 million market cap, $50 million market cap, brand new cards, and then new cards that are constantly coming on the market with that same sort of market cap. And then every set, $100 million market cap, $100 million market cap with the prices that things are going on the secondary market. And it's like, where's all the money to kind of continue to push that up coming from? Because I mean, I think most people in this hobby are 35, 25. Um, and is really what's fueling it is that people are taking credits and loans, and sort of leveraging, because they think it's good investments, and how much of that is really happening in all of these places. Um, that's where mine goes with this type of stuff, or my sort of concerns. I don't know. Uh, when you look at Pokemon, or when you look at these other hobbies, do you feel, you said when you looked at um, video games, it was more obvious to you, or you felt this makes no sense. Why did you get that feeling with something like video games, and maybe not with Pokemon, or other areas? I'm curious.
Well, the graded video game market, literally, if we go back just a few short years before WADA came into existence, literally you could get some of those games just graded by VGA for several $1,000s. So what really happened there was you're telling me simply because a new grading company came into the market and found a way to, I'm going to just word it this way, allegedly hype the market up. Now all of a sudden something that was selling for $6,000 graded by another company
Mm.
is now worth six figures. That's completely insane. It just doesn't work. And when you started talking to a lot of these people that were getting involved in this market, it was, well, I see great potential in this. Everybody knows who Mario is. Everybody knows who Samus Aran is. Everybody knows who Link is, Legend of Zelda, right?
Mhm.
Most of the people that were buying into this stuff were going on forums, and it was all about the money. It was all about the value. It was all about the fact that now there was this grading company that catered to them, more the speculators and the investors. And normally, when that starts to happen in any collecting category, all of a sudden my ears perk up because that's what happened in rare coins back in the 1980s when we had that speculative bubble in the rare coin marketplace. A lot of the grading companies came in, Wall Street got involved, overall auction companies got involved, scrupulous dealers got involved. And
Mhm.
all of a sudden, prices started rising. And now people were going out there going, I'm investing in rare coins. It's going to finance my retirement. It's going to finance my kids' education. And that's usually the warning sign when there is a bubble in that market that's brewing. And video games were just too new, too speculative. The average person out there, let's be realistic, that wants to collect video games, who loves the art, who loves the entertainment that they provide. In most cases, I'm not saying they're not going to own a graded video game, but they're most likely going to want it because they want to play it. They're not part of that small percentage that is paying 10, 20, 50, $100,000 for these particular items or up. So that's how a lot of us were able to assess who's really in this market. You know, a lot of these markets are very niche. When you find markets, and I know this from being a consultant in the antiques and collectibles trade, wherever there's a market, regardless of what it is, whether we talk rare coins, comic books, video games, Pokemon, if you're involved in that market, you know who the top players are. You know who the people, the whales, the people spending significant amounts of money. In most cases, you know who those individuals are. If other people that you never heard of start coming into that market and it's like, I got money to spend, I'm going after graded games, I'm going after this, you should always be cautious because that means that potentially a speculative bubble is booming. And what was very interesting, like going back to the Carl Jopes video, where he pretty much did an expose exposing Wada Games and potentially, how do I want to say this, alleged market manipulation and unethical activity with heritage auctions potentially and also Wada Games. If you look in that video, he even lays out the groundwork because I was working behind the scenes with him on that. So was Pat the NES Punk. How he went and just analyzed what was propping up the value of a lot of these games. And it was people coming in solely to make money. There's the infamous dentist. I don't know if you guys know who I mean. Those of you that follow Great at Video Games, you know who this guy is, who came in, he set up an LLC, started taking investors' money. I believe that's what occurred. Don't quote me on that, but I believe that's what occurred. And he started going after paying ridiculous prices for some of these games. I mean, I myself, I made a ton of money. You guys are going to laugh here. I don't know if you're aware of this. If you watch my channel, I bring this up several times. There was a game for the Atari 2600, Spider-Man, released, I think, 1982, Parker Brothers. You used to be able to go on websites and you would get this game case fresh. You could buy cases of them for like $40 a piece. We
Mhm.
were all going into the market. We were buying cases of this stuff, getting this stuff graded. It was coming back 9.8. People at one point were paying $5,000 to $10,000 for this graded game. They could have just went on a website and bought for $40, sent it to WADA, paid $60 to have it graded, consign it to an auction house, and they would have literally almost 1,000 times their money, or at least several hundred times their money. It's insane. You know, it's just like I go in a lot of these Facebook groups and I'm a member of them. I try not to post much because if they find out reserved investments is here, I know I'm going to get trolled. I know I'm going to get criticisms for some of the stuff that I talk about, for some of the stuff that I try to educate people on when it comes to antiques and collectibles. And somebody posted this meme of if you would go back in time and you would spend $100 on some of these GI Joe products that they were selling through the Sears catalog at that particular time, meaning you just plunked down $100 and you bought those particular items. Today, if you kept them in near mint, you could have even opened them. It would be worth, you would have literally $2,000 there. And underneath the meme, it says, this proves that toys are a great investment. Now, I don't mean to bust anybody's bubble, but if you go back to 1982, I'm here to tell you, as somebody educated in finance, if you put that same $100 in an S&P 500 index fund, even with the market downturn today, you would have close to $9,000 sitting. So are toys really that good of an investment? when we compare it to the overall performance of the stock market, is this individual that posted that name even aware of that comparison? If you're going to argue that something's an investment, you have to look at the opportunity of where else that capital can be employed. That's
Sure.
my perception. And that's why when we talk about Pokemon, when we talk about these collectibles, it's very hard to gauge the future as a result. Because even if there's going to be people, I get this. I've been on YouTube now 4 years, believe it or not. And I have people that come to me, Sean, you were dead wrong. I took this X number of dollars, I put it into this product, and it's worth X number of dollars over here. And I say, you can't just look at it from that perspective. It's more complex than that. You got to look at what you gave up to do that. If you went into debt to do it, you've already made a bad decision. If you're not contributing regularly to a 401k, a retirement plan, you don't own a home, you have credit card debt, you have a car payment, you're making a huge mistake. And that's the standpoint that I come from. You got to look more in depth. You got to look at the opportunity cost. It's not just easy to say, I paid $100 for this. Over here, now it's worth 500. Well, did you sell it when it hit 500? Because now we're having a different conversation. If you bought something for 100 and 2 years later, you were able to sell it for 500, I assure you, you did very well. But what did you do with the profit then? Did it go into something else speculative? Did you put it in cryptocurrency, a penny stock, a meme stock? That matters. So I think it's more complex than how the average person looks at these markets. That's all that I'm trying to say. And that's what I try to get people to realize. Collectible finance is more three-dimensional than two-dimensional. It's not just buy low, sell high.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of this is a constantly moving puzzle. You know, money management is a puzzle, right? And you have a lot of options, and you have a lot of options to buy, you have options to sell, and then you need to put your money in something else, and you need to find, yeah, what percentage should I put in this and this, and how do I manage all of this? You know, absolutely. I think going back to so for Pokemon, right?
Mhm.
Let's take base set Charizard and sort of evolutions Charizard, which are two.
Okay.
And let's take because one thing you talked about, which is very similar to video games, is something like Jungle First Edition PSA 10s. I'm not sure if you followed that market, but so you know, maybe 2 years ago, Dan, who's my Patreon partner, my sort of business partner in this space for content, we're making videos basically saying, hey, we have hundreds of these that we're grading. We know that there are tons of these out there. Sort of very similar story. Not so much that new people coming in could get access to the raw ones, so maybe not as terrible as your video game example, where it's like literally you could go and buy these raw and then grade them yourself and do it. A little bit harder to actually source them. They were mostly like already had by people, but um, we knew that the market was going to be flooded with these. Now there was a question of how much demand there would be, et cetera, et cetera. But the Jungle Eevee and Pikachu went from about $1,000, to $100, something like that.
Correct.
The a short amount of time and was $50, the year before. So it went from 50 to $1,000 in a short period. Base set Charizard, a card that there were already a ton in the pop. A ton of people wanted that card. That also had a really intense move. And I bought an entire base set, PSA 9 set, in I believe 2018 for $600, $600 to $800. I can't remember exactly. I think it was maybe like $650 in auction or something. And that was a really good deal at the time. It's probably worth $900, kind of buy it now market type of thing. And then I sold that set for $10,000, and it even got up to 12,000, right? And then it came all the way back down to about 5,000 or 4,000 a year later. So these types of crazy movements, but it's now like, well, at 5,000 or 4,000, it's still 10 times the value, not quite, right? 8 times something the value that it was, 6 times the value that it was just 2 years ago. are we at the floor? These types of questions, is it going to come back up, or is there still so much speculation in all these collectible markets that now still isn't a good time to invest, is what I think about. Because, you know, a lot of people ask me all the time, like, Jake, I love this stuff. Is now a good time to buy it? Basically, that's the $1 million question that, if any of us, we all have sort of our opinions, but we're careful to share them because we don't want other people to do exactly what we're saying. Because I'm comfortable losing my own money if I'm wrong, but it makes me very uncomfortable to say something and think that someone else would do it and then maybe take a loss that they really can't afford or that they shouldn't. That type of thing. Um, but I certainly like the price of 5,000, or, for the PSA 9 Charizard in and of itself, 1,200 or whatever it is, a lot better than 6,500, which is what it was at the height. But it's like, do you view that as investable? Did you sell your PSA 10s, at the top? Why did you hold them if you did? When did you buy them? I'm interested, Sean, in sort of your take on sort of that movement and what you would do as a sort of speculator or flipper in that. Are you able to sell at the height? Do you buy back in now, or do you wait for an even lower price, or even more of sort of the speculative fever of a lot of stuff to leave the market, I guess, is what I'm getting at.
Well, I will say this. I was always good at spotting trends. And I'm not saying I can predict the lows or highs of any market in the antiques and collectibles trade. No one can. If anybody tells you that, it's next to impossible. You know that.
Mhm.
But what happened was, do you remember? I'm sure you're aware of Rudy with Alpha Investments, right?
Sure.
When he launched his channel, I was like one of his first early subscribers.
Mhm.
Where I would watch this guy come on pretty much YouTube and talk about the investment potential of Magic the Gathering. And I remember thinking at the time, very few people are thinking about this. And I also like Magic the Gathering. So I went to the market at that time and I started to look for PSA 10 cards, not only a Magic the Gathering, but I was also going after Pokemon. Anything that I could get under a certain dollar amount, which at that particular time was under $2,000 per card, I was willing to pay. So
Okay.
I did very well because I actually forged a relationship. I know I did business with Vintage Magic, if you know Daniel Chang,
Mhm.
for some of the stuff that I was looking for. I also went to eBay. I did very well buying on eBay at that particular time. That's where I got a lot of this stuff. And as time went on, I realized that the Magic the Gathering stuff, literally by 2017, 2018, had really popped. And so did the Pokemon stuff started to pop at that particular time.
Mhm.
Well, when I went back into the market and just started looking, I realized, it's probably going to be difficult if I sell my PSA 10 Pokemon cards from the WotC original era, first editions. I'm probably going to have a hard time buying them back, or I'm going to have to pay an increased price. So I made the decision to let go of not all, but a lot of my Magic the Gathering collection at that time because I knew I was going to make a lot of money on it.
Mhm.
I did not let it go as much of the Pokemon products that I had. I kept that. And in a way, I'm kind of glad that it played out that way because the Magic the Gathering market went up, then it came down, then it went up, then it came down to the point where I even have to ask the question, aside from the coveted, alpha, beta that you keep hearing about, even unlimited to a certain extent, are people still investing in Magic the Gathering? And I'm being facetious when I say that. I know they are, but prices have been down pretty much for the last couple of years and that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, my issue with Magic the Gathering was just always feeling like I feel like as a card enthusiast and TCG enthusiast, I'm a big fan of Magic the Gathering. But the IP, there's the characters, the story, the world, I have no attachment to. Like I
Yeah.
have, attachment to other things I collect, like Star Wars and Marvel and Harry Potter and I think Magic just doesn't have that type of appeal. So for someone like me who's a massive non-sports card collector, I certainly have alpha beta and go after alpha beta and some of the originals, but I don't go super deep, outside of that, to your point. That sort of satisfies me. I think there's a lot of people in Pokemon who certainly came back and they just collected base set first edition and maybe Jungle Fossil and Gyms, but there's so many people who are so deep in all sorts of niche areas, and every generation, and also the amount of collecting going on, versus a market that's driven by playability, and the sort of massive kind of difference in the buyers, the consumers of the market, is something I find interesting.
I did sell. The one that I kinda regret was, and right
Mm.
now I'm kinda split on it because I did well on it, but I did sell. I had some Jungle and Fossil first
Mm.
edition PSA 10s,
Yeah.
hollows, and I kinda now looking back, I'm like, I wasn't too attached to those particular cards, so it's okay that I sold them, but part of me wishes I woulda kept some in that collection. Normally, when I sell a collection, I don't sell all of it. I will pull pieces out if I consider it still has potential, if it's something that
Yeah.
I'm emotionally attached to. That, though, I let go, and it was like, it's one of those things.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm being like totally transparent with my audience, like my current feelings about cards like that is that because of where the modern and the middle era and sort of prices are at, I'm a bit worried about the whole market. But because there's just so much, I just worry about the amount of speculation and what all this burn. Because I just don't think I personally don't think it's going to continue, and I think there's going to be some weird things that reckonings and things that are going to happen. I'm just not sure how that's going to affect everything.
Oh, I agree with
But
you.
but if I separate that stuff and let's look at the cards they're talking about, PSA 10 first edition Wansies, and I look at the prices, and I think, I'm of two thoughts. One, I think, is the condition rarity enough for me? I think because there are lots of these cards. This is not, low serialized. This is not, you know, um, Action Comics number one, a couple hundred copies in existence. This is not, Mickey Mantle's, a few hundred copies. No, this is not trophy cards in Pokemon, 20 copies in the world, 100 copies in the world, 50 copies in the world. This is cards that, who knows, right? 100,000, 200,000 copies, probably out there. Maybe less, probably more actually, when we think about just how much sealed is being opened and how much we continue to find. But if you look at the pop reports are saying, 200 graded PSA 10, 600 graded PSA, right? There are only 1,000 total graded, these types of things. And then you look at, you know, sports cards and base rookies selling for $100 that, that there are 42,000 graded already, more big grade, it's when you look at sort of all of the options and everything, I do love these cards. These cards are even if I see them so much that at times I take them for granted, which I think happens, with anything. It's like these are the cards that I collected as a kid. These are the most special arts. If I could only have one thing, it would absolutely be these at the end of the day, because it started it all. And when I see those price points, I think, okay, as a collector, if you can afford it, if you love it, I can see why people are buying and holding. I just cannot understand the person who's paying $7,000 for what seems like a random card, to me. But again, I could be a fool, and just not understand yet the importance of full arts and the historicness of these types of things. I think it's just, only time will tell, kind of where the consensus, goes on this. But I'm with you, and obviously I still have most of those myself. I sold maybe 30-40%, at an around sort of the high-ish, for 6 months, sort of around the top. And I was never planning on selling, Sean. I was planning on holding that stuff for, 20, 30 years,
I believe
which which is the big reason why I sold, because I was like, well, if a guy like me who was planning to hold for 30, 40 years can't keep this, and I was also didn't need the money, this must be a bubble. It's like sort of taking your own kind of pulse and being like, well, then who's buying this? If not someone like me who can afford it and afford to keep it and loves it and believes in it and still doesn't want it, and still needs to move on because of the high prices. So I don't know. It wouldn't stun me if in a few years from now, if if it rebounds and goes up in price. But I guess I really think the more likely scenario is bubbles burst in a lot of collectible stuff. I think you have all this Disney stuff. You have booster boxes like the Kakawa thing going from like $200 to $600 in a week. This like random like Chinese Disney stuff that all the influencers are opening online. It's
Yeah.
like it's cool, but like what's happening? Like, you know, it's like the first time anyone's ever seen a serialized card. It's like you know, and it's like, well, they can create serialized cards till the end of time. Why these? Why are these important? Uh when I see all of that type of behavior, I just wonder how much of that needs to kind of get out and leave the market before the good stuff then can again stabilize and then move up. So I'm talking forever here. How do you think? How do you think? And have you can you because you have a lot more knowledge than I do. How do you think? Can you think of other hobbies or times that you've experienced something like that where it's like, how did the more, let's just say we're right, and the more sort of like higher end historic stuff fare after sort of a general kind of like macro hobby burst, and then how long did it take to recover? Does anything come to mind for you?
Yeah, absolutely. We can look at comic books during the 1990s, the
Yeah.
speculator boom. Believe it or not, back in the 1990s, people were not really collecting actively, going after the vintage stuff. It was all the modern stuff because the manufacturers putting out so much stuff, people were convinced that that was where it was going to be. They would actually relaunch series starting with issue 1 so that people would go and hoard the issues. And
Mhm.
then they would make holofoil alternate covers, which is what we're kind of seeing now. There is a parallel there because comic books are hot again. But a lot of people don't realize if you go back to that time frame, and even if you get a copy of the Overstreet comic book price guide from like 1989 all the way through the early 1990s, you're going to see in certain instances vintage comic books, even though they weren't selling at the price points that they were today, they pulled back. There was
Mhm.
less demand.
Mhm.
It was just that there were several catalysts that occurred in this market that caused comic books to come back to the forefront. And that was the advent of third party grading and also Marvel and to a lesser extent DC, the cinematic universe. When Iron Man premiered in what was it, 2008, 2009, that was a blockbuster movie that really put comic books back on the map, especially with third party grading. So yeah, there's all types of dynamics where that can occur. We can even look in other markets for this as well. If you look at vintage toys, there was a period, literally kind of in the middle, where vintage Star Wars toys were not doing as well as you would think they were. Like most people don't realize this. This is the biggest problem that I have with today's collectibles market. And this ties into video games, this ties into everything pop culture related. It used to be a manufacturer or a company would produce a product, whether it's Atari 2600, Coleco, and television, if you want to look at vintage video games from that standpoint, or even like the vintage Star Wars line, vintage G.I. Joe line, vintage Masters of the Universe He Man line, even the vintage Transformer line. And what would happen is these particular products would hit the market. Everybody would go gangbusters for them. Then, because of how kids are, their attention spans aren't that great. After a couple of years, it would fall to the wayside and these products would end up in the bargain bin. And when they were in
Mhm.
the bargain bin, very few people bought them thinking they were going to be serious investments in the future, right? So what happened? Nostalgia kicked in then 10 to 20 years later. And it's like, wow, I wonder how many original vintage Kenner Star Wars action figures they released in the market back during their time where they were made available between 1978 and 1984. So where am I going with this? Today, we want everything to be collectible. So Pokemon puts out a product, everybody goes to the market and they hoard this stuff. Nintendo discontinues the Nintendo 3DS literally 3 short years ago, and now what happens in that market? Rather than like the original Nintendo, when Nintendo came out with the Super Nintendo back in 1992, Nintendo games were thrown into the clearance bin. Nobody
Mhm.
wanted them. Vintage Nintendo games didn't become a thing literally for like 20 years later.
Mhm.
So there's this weird dynamic. I call it we're almost in another dimension when it comes to collectibles, where we're not allowing collectibles to go through their natural worthless state. It's
Yeah.
everybody's coveting it. Everybody's like, I gotta get this. They discontinued it. They're not making it anymore. I want to own it. And right away, when it's discontinued, prices shoot up. That to me is unsustainable. It,
Yeah. I think I think that, right, like if we look at the last 10 years of Pokemon, there was a 2016 boom around Pokemon Go, right? And a
Yep.
lot of people my age like coming back in, collecting cards, and that certainly impacted the market, right? And the market grew quite a bit. Now it didn't really impact, the most expensive kind of modern cards were like, uh $200 kind of I think that the Mega Charizard in Evolutions went maybe up to like $200 to $300 for a little bit, then went back down. Um, Sun and Moon was kind of a kind of stable-ish period. The whole kind of Sun and Moon prices were kind of starting to go down a little bit towards the beginning, and then kind of up, and then way up towards the end. Um, so I guess the question, Sean, right, is like, well, are we going to see another boom? Is this the smaller boom, and there's still one more really huge boom, coming in 3, 4, 5 years before a longer period of cooling off in comic books or something like that could exist? Because right, like should I be steadily buying these vintage $1,000, 600, $2,000, these best items right now because they're gonna in 3, 4, 5 years, there's going to be sort of a similar another type of boom around this? Or has that already happened and we're going to be in a much longer stagnant period? Because people in the hobby, they I think people in this hobby are often way too confident about the patterns that we've seen so far
I
continuing to
agree.
repeat themselves. It's like it's stunning to me. It's like, dude, like this is like just because this happened the last 3 years, it doesn't mean it's gonna happen again. Now, could it happen again? So I think that's sort of the big question. And to be honest, like I answer these things by hedging my risk. I don't know.
Mhm.
Right? The reality is I don't know. I think both things are possible. I think that I think that I feel more negative than positive. I think a little more risk than positive overall because of the market cap and just the size of the money. It just seems so huge to me, and all of these other arcana and all of the printing that's going on. I just and how big One Piece is, and the cards are going for $1,500 in One Piece. It's just like on and on and on. There are examples of $1,500, 2,000, DBS, 2,000, $3,000 cards, and all these modern things. It's just, can it really 2, 3x boom again, before sort of some sort of, more stable stagnant period? And then the other question, John, is will there be that in Pokemon, or will it be more kind of stable in Pokemon and kind of steadily go up? Do all collectibles need to have that phase of like they're unpopular again, or they're sort of longer term stagnancy? And I see some people in the chat, not a lot, but a couple saying, as we compare this to other hobbies, one of the common things people say is, well, Pokemon's better than all this other stuff. Pokemon
Of course. I
Pokemon
don't
is
think
the
it's fun.
magical it's the magical land that is free from all other psychological and supply and demand fundamentals that impact every market somehow. Um, but um, the truth is that um, I think, I don't know. I think that there are some possibilities on all of those things, and I guess I'm constantly thinking about that and sort of acting on that type of not being sure. And that just doesn't seem to be the the general message and feeling. It tends to be more um I think more sort of gung ho, from most places, at least in the hobby. What do you make of that? What do you think? Um, what do you think of those different possibilities? And do you think all those things are possible? And how would you go about kind of navigating that?
Well, first, all markets change in the antiques and collectibles trade. If you look at comic books are not where they were in the 1970s and the 1980s and the 1990s or where they are today. Same with rare coins. all of these markets that have longevity end up changing, and they end up going through almost in certain cases, predictable boom and bust cycles. There was a time where coins were considered a top tier collectible, and they still are. But there was a period of time where there was no interest. There was no new collectors coming into that market. It was pretty much existing collectors and investors just selling to one another. And that period literally lasted like right after the great coin boom and bust that happened, the speculative bubble in the 1980s. If you go back and you look at coin prices throughout the 1990s, even the early 2000s, most coin prices were flat across the board. There was no new blood coming into that market. It really didn't become a thing again until around 2006, 2007, right before the financial crisis, is when certain people started getting back in the coins. And then you had CAC come along, revolutionize the market once again with a third-party company that's pretty much trying to keep the two top-tier grading companies, PCGS and NGC, honest. And that pretty much ignited a new fire in that market. So these markets do change and evolve. But even if you look at like high-end art, whatever market you want to compare this to, we don't just have to compare it to pop culture. All these markets have cycles where there's a boom period, then at some point it cools off, then at some point down the line, somebody else rediscovers it, makes it a thing, draws new attention to it, whether it's a piece that's sold for a high price at auction, the media is getting involved, and then there's more cash coming into that market. So if Pokemon's going to be a thing, which I think it is over the long term, I'm not saying it's going to be comparable, the dynamics wise, to that of rare coins or high-end art or certain markets that really have 100 or longer following behind them, a track record. But if it is going to be a thing, it's going to go through those dynamics. Do I think, like you said, would I invest now? Why prices are low in some of this thing, thinking that there's going to be another bump up? I personally wouldn't take the risk because I see opportunity elsewhere, in my opinion. Now, if you just want to own the cards, if you want to buy them, if you say, you know what, Sean, I already have enough in the stock market, I already have enough in these other collectibles, I'm going to take the risk, I'm only going to spend X number of dollars, I would say go for it. But would it be for me? No, I wouldn't be taking that risk.
Fair enough. So let's take some questions. If people have any questions, feel free to start putting them in the chat, and I'll throw them on screen, and Sean will answer them.
Sure. I should say I tend to go off on a tangent. So if I do go off on a tangent or a rant and you don't think I'm answering your question, just let me know. And I say that to you too, Jake, because sometimes I do get caught up in talking.
Compared to me, I think you're articulate and succinct. So the people will have to be patient with us. Yeah,
I just want to respond to something here. That there's a lot of comments in the chat where people are saying, "Well, why do you keep comparing Pokemon to Beanie Babies or comic books or coins or art?" Because when we talk about investing in the antiques and collectibles trade, if you're just looking at one market, that market does not exist in a vacuum. There's dynamics that fundamentally define how that market's going to move and operate. And we can compare it to other collecting categories or other markets so that we can kind of learn and assess where that market's been, how's it going, and pretty much where it's going to end up. So you can imply some knowledge to this and say, okay, based on this, 10, 20 years, Pokemon might be here. That's why we do that.
Yeah, and I personally believe that, talking about really long term, I actually think that as long as cards stay relevant, which I think is a sort of interesting topic in and of itself, sort of the whole card collecting category stays, relevant. Pokemon TCGs are going to be a lot bigger. I don't know as big as right now, but they're going to be much bigger than they were in the past moving forward, in my opinion. And animes and all the Japanese and Chinese and the global collecting market that's behind all of this, which is very different than just sort of the sports card market. Like the globalness and the demographics of age. Like I do think that, I mean, I'm when we talk really long term, I could see a lot of prices being significantly higher than they are now, and market caps, particularly of this WotC first edition PSA 10, PSA 9 stuff. I still believe that. I know that I talk very negatively a lot because I think in the moment that's like what I believe people need to hear from my perspective. But I do think that there's reason to think that. I just also think that so many people think that so much of that is priced into the market that I sort of agree with Sean that at the moment there's just so much more negativity other places that I'm kind of taking more advantage of, I guess. And both in the in collectible hobbies and then also in real estate and I think that like real estate market will probably worsen in the next year and there'll be opportunity like there's just a lot of I I really think I really agree with Sean and just trying not to FOMO and slowly collect, have fun, buy items that you really enjoy that you want to hold for the long run. I think you're very likely to be okay doing that. And if you're really a fairly wealthy collector and a hardcore fan of this, I think you'll probably buy pretty well. Even with a lot of that stuff, maybe already that optimism sort of built into the prices. Okay. Um, I do want to touch on one thing, and this is something I've said. I think to say that I've criticized your channel ever is too strong of a way of putting it, Sean. But I've said, on a live probably here and there that, you know, responding to some things that you've said, feeling like maybe I'm a little bit more bullish. I think in this conversation, I've been the more bearish one at times. But I think one thing I've talked about on my channel, because you've talked about like Harry Rinker, quite a bit. And one thing that I think is very different now is social media and the
Oh, I agree.
communities. Yeah, and I'm not saying that it was probably unfair at me, the way, but what it was really more like I listened to some Harry Rinker stuff, and Harry Rinker, I don't think got or understood from these, things that I listened to. Again, probably unnecessary to bring up people's names, but
No, it's good.
that the sort of shift and power of the community because now it's so much more than just about the cards and the collectibles. And it's always been, right? I mean, people have always
Right.
been on forums, have always been going
Well, now
to
it's all about the image, right? The
yeah,
image of Pokemon is really what's taking over, or any of these
yeah.
collectibles. But I will say, Harry Rinker does address this in later
Okay.
articles in his work.
Um, so yeah, rather than putting sort of negativity to anyone's name,
No, it's okay.
my feeling is that and in response to this, like without the Discord community makes a difference. And I forget one thing that makes a huge difference between now and the '90s comics crash and the stagnant period of Pokemon is the YouTube Discord communities we have now. I probably wouldn't be nearly as engaged. Yeah, I think that adds so much more value. I think the concern that I would have from an investment perspective is that value is already built into the
Yeah.
prices in a lot of ways. One, and then the second thing I would add is that social media also makes crashes happen a lot quicker now
Yep.
because people are so up on the information that sort of that fear cycle can also spread so quickly. Are the two things I would say. But I do think that the community part is so key and is something that is fundamentally different. Of course, human beings have always sought for community, but the power and part of why the pandemic, in particular, this boomed so much on the pandemic was because of online communities, because we were all feeling lonely and isolated and weren't unable to have human contact. That is a humongous reason, not to mention all of the cash that was put into our, people not working, not being able to spend. We've been over the million reasons why, the on this channel why it likely boomed, but understanding sort of the importance of that and the friendships and that there's so much more value there than just the fundamentals of the card. Just I like the art, just I enjoy the art. That would not be able to be here without all the Discord communities, the YouTube channels, the forums, the online space. So I do think, although that's already priced into the prices, it's it might set a floor of sorts, or it might make it harder, as Sean said before, like for really a zero, for a Beanie Babies, there's a million reasons why this is not Beanie Babies or differences between, I don't know,
Yeah.
million, not a million, but there are some few key differences. The number one being that this is an IP, a world that's been around for 26 years that has tons of what we don't need to go into all of that. It's obvious, but Anything you wanted to add to this sort of idea that I just think is important, sort of the impact of social media on these markets?
Well, social media can enhance a market as we're seeing. It has. It brings collectors together. The problem is it's also very siloed. So if something changes, if the perspective or the taste of that particular changes, what can happen is negativity can seep in to those
Mhm,
collecting communities as well. And that can alter prices going forward as well.
mhm,
We're already seeing that in certain markets. And you
mhm.
also have to look at what happened during the pandemic. Prices did rise exponentially, but they didn't stay there. A lot of this stuff did end up coming back down. So if we're going to make the argument that it's because of social media or Discord communities, apologize, I am a Gen Xer, I don't use Discord, please forgive me. But with that being said, because these communities exist, it doesn't mean that it's a guarantee that these prices are going to stay at X price level going forward. Markets can and do change regardless.
Mhm. You should come hang out in our Discord, Sean. You'd be a nice asset there, and we have a lot of coin guys and all sorts of like we have a vast collecting community of people collecting all sorts of things.
I
Um,
wanted to get involved in Discord, believe it or not. I just never had the time to learn it. That's my problem. But then again, I said all the way back in 2015, I'll never have a YouTube channel. I was dead
okay,
against it. That changed.
we're gonna get you in. We're gonna give you the option at least. Okay, questions. Youngster Ryan, hey Sean, what's your favorite Pokemon?
Charizard.
Charizard.
Now ask me if I have a first edition Charizard. I do not.
No,
That's
maybe
not one of
one
the
day.
ones I was able to get and hold on to.
Reek says, "What is one of your most coveted collectibles that you have never owned but would like to one day?" You might have answered it, but it's up
Sure,
to
I
you.
am going for a complete type set of US coins and currency.
Hmm.
So I'm working towards that. I am a little over halfway there, believe it or not, at present time, all in uncirculated condition. There's certain coins though I will never own. Obviously, if you guys follow the rare coin market, you know that there's certain coins where they're like $20 million per. It's ridiculous. So there's certain items I've already accepted that I will never own. But that is something that I am striving for little by
Mm,
little. Also, I hate to say this, but it's more on the high end art market. That would be something that I would really, really love to own,
mm.
like an original Monet, something of that nature. That would
That'd
be
be cool.
yeah. For pop culture
My
items,
father's an art collector, and I we have art dealers in my family who deal in that type of stuff, and it's a crazy scene. Um, the art dealer scene dealing with these types of things. Talk about a market that is like so emotional and crazy. Obviously, you have the masters, but like the modern parts of the market that they deal in is like it'll like you'll pull out your hair if you try to you know. It's so yeah it's so based on just sort of experts, and that's a very interesting topic, by the way, is like how do values get is it experts that sort of tell us, or is it like a consensus, or is it something inherent in the card? Something I think about quite a bit in these spaces, how value gets sort of like decided over time. Um, anyway, oh, but finish, Sean. What you were going to say something else for pop culture?
yeah, I would like to own there's certain prototype toys in the Star Wars market. Now, I'm not gonna say that I will never own them, but I think that I could probably get there. I did have a chance to buy a rocket firing Boba Fett action
Mm,
figure prototype at a certain point, but I did turn it down at that particular time frame. I don't really regret the decision though, because toys are a hard animal to keep in mint condition. There's issues if you own toys. That's why I tend to go after like, I collect vintage Star Wars. This is gonna surprise a lot of people. Actually, I have a video planned on this coming up. Proof
mm.
cards from the Vintage Kenner line.
Oh, I don't know that. Those. Oh no, wait. I think I have heard. I'm trying to think. I think I watched a video on YouTube, someone talking about that. But yeah,
All is what it is basically a piece of cardboard that shows the original art that was going to be on the particular card back before it went into production.
yeah.
And there's only X number of them out there, and AFA does grade them, so you can get them graded.
I
And
think I
that's
saw someone selling them in the Facebook group that I was in, like,
yes.
a little bit ago. Yeah.
It's an esoteric market, but it has
Yeah,
lags simply because of how many are out there only. So I do tend
interesting,
to invest in them. I won't lie.
interesting. I do think that some of those toys are cool. So, like, Star Wars made, like, a the 2021 Masterwork set, which is like a modern top Star Wars set, has like an out of the box card which has the original toy on it, and it's like sort of serialized. So I thought it'd be fun to pair the cards like with the toys as a little collection goal that I'm working on. That's kind of fun. The modern serialized card with the with the vintage toy is kind of fun to me. Um, and I enjoy both. Um, okay. Dan asks, Catch 'em All Collectibles asks, question: Are we in a cardboard super bubble, exacerbated when it is plastic encapsulated? So we've talked about this a decent amount, but we haven't really talked about grading and
Sure.
grading impact. So I think I'm going to use this question to ask you, what do you think of grading? What's going on with that?
Well, first, I am in a lot of these markets, I am pro third party grading. And I know that, that offends certain people for whatever reason. People come to my channel and they think that I would be against third party grading because I know you brought up Harry Rinker. Harry
Mhm.
Rinker is actually against third party grading in
Interesting.
collectibles. He considers it almost a form of market manipulation because once you get the grade and you put that out there, people want to go for a certain grade in that item, and it
Mm,
causes the price of those particular pieces to go up in value exponentially.
mm,
So you can view it almost as, I want to use this term very loosely, a Ponzi scheme, because what's happening is people are coming into the market, they're going after the top tier collectibles, and the people that had them are benefiting. Then when they go to sell them, pretty much what happens is it sets a new price level for them.
mhm.
So after they're already into the market firsthand, secondhand now they start selling for higher prices. So if you want to play in that pool, it's very hard unless if you uncover a cache of ungraded collectibles that are going to grade high to get involved in that market.
I'm not sure I follow the logic of the Ponzi scheme, but I do see a greater fool situation. I do think it, but again, I'm not sure. It goes back to this, and you talked about going after PSA 10 first editions, right? I mean,
Mhm.
I think when you take a very historic item that isn't extremely rare, but you can create sort of that condition rarity versus the
Yep.
absolute rarity, there's some sort of like magic that happens that I find some value in that. But the rarer the item, the less the grade tends to matter to me, but not to everyone. Some people, they love the highest grade of the rarest item. They want to
Mhm.
go double. And then some people, like, they're obsessed with like black labels and they want, the pristine, all tens from Beckett. I don't, and are willing to pay 10 times the price of that in some cases for like the PSA 10. I don't understand that. But it's funny, it's all sort of very irrational and subjective because it's
Sure.
all me liking PSA 10s is no more rational than someone really liking a black label or someone really liking, the trophy card graded in high. I find it's a sort of a very interesting thought experiment to go into. And as far as the long term of that, I do think it adds a risk. If you're buying a absolute rare card, sort of how many, unless there's, you're wrong and there's extra copies and all these types of things. We have some sense of the intended distribution of how much is out there. With the condition rarity, you don't know how many are going to be graded in the future. Obviously, the grade the we saw how that impacted both in Pokemon with like jungle first edition commons and uncommons, and then video games, the market that you were covering and following, people looking at the pop reports and saying, oh, super low, but there were tons and people were slowly grading them, and of certain games, right? um so there can create some risk there if people aren't sophisticated, but there's also a large contingent of the people are like super negative and are like, why would anyone ever pay for a more pristine version or these types of things? And I tend to be like, yes, bubbles can easily form around these things. I think I don't agree with the type of speculation and sort of like I like the absolute rarity, but I also value the condition rarity to some extent. And I tend to fall somewhere in the middle of sort of these voices and spectrums, at least at the moment. How about yourself for grading for yourself? Where do you find value? Do you prefer absolute rarity? Does condition rarity work for you fine? What are your thoughts on that type of stuff?
I actually prefer absolute rarity. And
Mhm,
usually, what I will use is I talk about this in my videos. It depends on the collecting market. If the market's established, like we're talking about rare coins that are graded, currency, even comic books, I will use something called the optimal collecting grade to find out what price point I should be buying in at.
Mhm.
And I talk about this. It's basically all is what an optimal collecting grade is. And you tend to use this more established collectibles because with Pokemon Magic, we're still kind of in that speculative era. Same thing is true with vintage graded toys. Really, there's no rhyme and reason why, like when we talk about vintage Star Wars, AFA graded. I'll see sometimes an AFA graded 85 Star Wars figure sell
Mhm.
for more than an AFA 90 graded Star Wars figure. Same
Mhm.
exact figure, same card back, same type,
Mhm.
everything. And it's like, what's happening here? That normally doesn't happen in more established markets when we talk rare coins, when we talk comic books. Now, it can, if we look at eye appeal of coins, that can play into it. But without going into detail in that, what I mean when I say optimal collecting grade, if it's an established market, let me use this as an example. Let's say that you're buying a comic book and it's comic book X is what we're going to call it. If
Okay.
comic book X is selling for $5,000 in 9.2, $7,000 in 9.4 grade, and $15,000 in 9.6, the optimal collecting grade to get that book in would be a 9.4 because that's the price point before it more than doubles almost in the next grade up. So that's what I use to buy in the collectibles. Now, I know what some of your people are probably in the comment section going to ask me, well, Sean, why did you go after PSA 10s then for Pokemon and Magic the Gathering? The answer is simple. It's a more speculative market. And at that particular point in time, there were premiums for those particular cards. But when I bought in, it wasn't as drastic as it literally became in the last few years.
Hmm.
So that's pretty much what I use. For instance, there's a lot of coins out there that I will buy in MS64 plus. And a lot of people say, well, Sean, 65 is Gem Mint. Well, if
Mhm.
the price is like 3 times higher than what I can get that particular coin in, if I'm going after MS64 plus, I'll just settle for excellent eye appeal 64 plus condition item and put it in my collection. And usually what I find is being involved in these markets for so long, when I go to sell that back into the market, somebody will come along and go, well, wait a minute, I can get this 64 plus particular coin here for less, literally almost 3 times less than what this 65 is going for. So then they end up bidding it up even more. And I do very well when I resell.
Mhm.
So
What was I gonna say? So I think that um, I lost my train of thought.
I'm
That's all right.
sorry.
We'll see if it comes back. No, not at all. Um, let's grab the next question here. Oh, this is what I was gonna say. So I do what you do as well, generally with that. I do one other thing I ask though is what is the average consumer in this market?
That's fair
Because
enough.
for me, like in Pokemon, part of the reason I went for the 10s, because the 10s still had, in many cases, quite a large premium over the 9s back in the day, but the price point was so low for like an average person to be able to buy that, and I totally agree with your point before, Sean. It's like, well, so when I look at the comic book market, it's like how many people can afford the 15,000? What is the average person? What is actually liquid? One can actually sell this. How liquid is it? What is the actual person actually can afford? And it's much easier for an item to go from $100 to $500 than it is to $500 to $2,500, even if it's the same percentage return in a market where most people who are buying have $100 or $500 to spend. But in a high-end art market, or in a, if you're dealing in a market that is super wealthy with super wealthy people, there may be a different price point that makes sense. And that, so I think trying to think about, obviously the Pokemon market has a wide variety of cards selling at a wide variety of different prices. And, I sell 5,000, 6,000, $7,000 cards, you know, reasonably regularly, like every couple months type of thing. So, but they're generally very rare items, and I generally have the only one on the market. You know, I think that item would be very difficult to sell most of those items if there were three or four. There's not a big buyer pool for that type of thing in the niche sort of Japanese vintage market. Now, in some of these Pikachu promos, there seems to be endless appetite, as we talked about before. At some of these price points, and there's a whole new thing going on, Sean, with I mean, it's not brand new now. It's been building for a while, but with like Chinese collectors buying Japanese PSA 10s of all sorts of promos and different things throughout the hobby. And every day people are messaging me, I just sold something and it was to China, and we're, continuing to happen. So it's, it's, it goes to show that it's very difficult. Like these markets can shift and change really quickly, and it's just so hard to predict. Like at one point, the buyer pool might be like, yeah, like that card, there just aren't the buyers in that $5,000 $7,000 range. But now these rich Chinese collectors are here, and now like it has totally changed that market. I mean, it's like we went from cards $50, now $600. We went from cards $200, 6,000. I have some cards I bought a year and a half ago for $200 that in PSA 10 are now selling for 6,000, 7,000. It's like these sort of wild things. And is that speculative mania, or is that a new established market because there's this new people in the market and they'll be able to, or are they buying just to flip? These are always the big questions, and who knows.
Well, I will say this. I do want to speak to this a little bit.
Sure.
I do think that the whole cardboard market, the whole collectible card game market is in
Mhm.
a little bit of a speculative euphoria at present
Yeah.
time. I mean, you see it right now with Flesh and Blood, MetaZoo. I mean, these particular card games literally just came on the scene and people are already getting the stuff graded. They're paying a premium for this stuff just because
Mhm.
the manufacturer decided, oh, we're going to create cold foils, or we're going to create this card in limited quantities and put it in
Mhm.
the stat. And people are like, oh, yeah, I pulled this. It's going to be worth X number of dollars.
Mhm.
Nobody really, the people that are involved in Flesh and Blood or MetaZoo, the numbers don't compare, obviously, to Pokemon or Magic the Gathering or even Yu Gi Oh! For that matter. It's too new.
So, what do you think of someone like Rudy, who's heavily investing in these things? At least seems to be.
Well, I think I got to tread carefully here. I have a lot of respect for Rudy, first of all. But I do think that he is able to come in because he's a market maker per se. He has a
Mhm.
YouTube channel. He has the presence. He has the ability to come in, and even if he devotes like hundreds of thousands of dollars to these markets, it's not going to break him. So he's somebody who's a little bit of a different beast, in my opinion, just because of the fact that he can come in this market and he can pretty much set the tone for it. All he has to do is a video, a box opening video, or a video. Look at this. The numbers show that Flesh and Blood is coming back. And people will, unfortunately, for better or worse, they'll get involved in that market.
Yeah.
And that's nothing against Rudy. Rudy's a great guy. I watch his content. I like his content. But I think when you get to that point, there is a little bit where you got to realize everything you say, somebody is going to be pretty much looking at and going, okay, does that mean this is a good investment? Is this the time to buy? Look at what this person's doing in the market. I want to be like that guy. One of the problems that I had early on when I started my YouTube channel is I get a lot of Rudy's Patreons that come to me for consulting advice.
Mhm.
And a lot of them will say to me, well, Sean, you're wrong. You tell us that we can't put all our money in collectible card games. There's this guy over here doing Magic who put all of his money in Magic the Gathering, and now he's worth millions. And I have to explain, you need to go back and watch a lot of his earlier content. That's not where he got his money primarily. And a lot of people don't want to take the time to do a deep dive and analyze, how did this person get to where he is? And again, that's
Yeah.
not a diss on Rudy. Rudy made a lot of excellent financial decisions. That's why he's where he's at. But on the same token, I don't think the average person can simply buy Magic the Gathering and attempt to get to that level.
Yeah, I think so. I have two thoughts about Rudy. One, I think that what percentage is he actually investing of his money in cardboard? Because first of all, he's doing real estate, he's doing stocks, he's doing a lot of other things, right?
Mhm.
He probably has enough in all of those to be completely safe and fine at this point. Triple times over, basically, many times over. But beyond that, even in the cardboard world, he's selling so much of it to patrons. He makes so much every month from patron. Like he's running a business where he's constantly flipping and reselling to
Yes.
offset his risk on actually investing and holding this sealed product. My issue with Rudy is he doesn't say that enough in my view. And I do think some of his videos are, if not outright market manipulation, dangerously close to market manipulation when you're a humongous person and you say every Pokemon box will be over $300 in a couple of years
Right.
and you own a ton of it. Like in any other field,
Oh,
you'd be in jail.
yes.
Like
Yes, they
and
cease
as
it.
charismatic as he is and as passionate as he is about this stuff, and like I also have like the same I just have a lot of fond feelings for him because I've been watching his channel for so many years and like we just love the same stuff and like there's aren't that many people on the planet who have the same type of passion for this stuff and passion for the finance. And so there's like a kindredness between like everyone that's kind of like that and like into this type of thing that I think exists. And it's clearly super genuine, from in my view from him. I've always got the feeling that he was passionate about this stuff. Um, but yeah, I don't like that stuff. That makes me very uncomfortable. And I don't know how to not see it like that, even though I always want to give him the benefit of sort of my own doubt. And again, this is the Wild West. This is not a security where the FBI is going to come after any of us for giving financial advice or talking about our opinions and stepping over the line maybe a little bit here and there. But anyway.
I wish though that he would do more live streams.
Dude,
Like I
I invited him to come on. So he watched it. He's like watched my channel, he's commented. I've talked to him before. And I don't know if it's that he seems to only want to talk to sort of like his inner circle at this point, or he doesn't, I don't know. I would love to have him on, like, dude, or just the two of you guys talk. Like if he doesn't, or the three of us talk would be sick. Like, and to actually like ask him that question rather than having to say this, um, behind his back, not really behind his back. It's
yeah, yeah.
it's in public, but sort of without him here to kind of respond to with his thoughts. He's such a like I bought a bunch. Like I have his like MetaZoo promos because I'm a big fan of Rudy. Like I'm a fan. You know what I mean? Like um, but I get it, and I think. I mean, you get it too. I mean, I think you and I have probably been doing our channels maybe around the same time. Actually, I think we probably started because I think we last time we talked was towards the start. I think of our channels. Maybe we'd both been doing it, 6 months or so, roughly something like that. But Rudy's been doing it for a long time, and you do have to kind of. There's so many people who want your attention and want to talk to you and want to engage with you that when you're that big
Yeah.
um that I think I totally get him just being like I don't want to like I want to focus on running my business and making money and not fielding who I should talk to and who's worth talking to and who's going to treat me fairly and what's good for my business. It's that he just doesn't want that headache. Like I as someone who even has as big of a channel as like, we do, right? Your channel's bigger than mine, but getting 4 or 5,000 views a video versus 40,000 views,
Oh, yeah.
uh, um, I even feel that way and understand, and people can take it the wrong way, right? That it's like, we're being disrespectful or we don't care about each individual person when it just becomes a sort of like, it's like you'll go crazy if you try to have every conversation with everyone online.
Oh, I agree. And one of the things that I'll be honest, I wasn't prepared for when I came to YouTube
Mm,
because I was writing behind the scenes and
mm,
doing like personal consulting before this. So this was like really putting myself out there. And I couldn't believe, I remember when I first started my channel, and I remember the first negative like response video I got,
yeah,
it was like hard to fathom. Like here I am, I have like, I think at the time I had like 3,000 subscribers.
mm,
Somebody actually felt the need to do a response video to something I said. Like,
sure,
that's a direction that, like, I never wanna go. Like, I do certain response videos to markets, though, I try to stay on point. I
yeah.
don't go after the individuals.
Yeah, I mean, Rudy has definitely been about that, about not talking about individuals. I've done more talking about individuals on my channel, and I've always felt super mixed about it. Um, you know, it is a it's something that I do when I've done. I've tried to do it respectfully and certainly talk about the arguments and the specifics, but I hear you. It's can you make the points without talking about the individuals? But sometimes people are so big and influential. It's like if you're not talking about it's them making the point that is the point. You see what I'm saying? Like, you know, versus just the point itself, if that makes sense. Like, anyway, Gamerson says, question: do you think a large part of the boom was a need for cryptocurrency investments to be turned into physical assets? How did the crypto market weave into and impact these collectible other alternative assets? Right.
Oh, it's definitely related. There's definitely a crossover there from crypto investors coming into the collectible space. As a matter of fact, I do think that since crypto kind of pulled back, there's not as much interest in crypto right now because prices are down. That's what's actually contributing a little bit to the pullback in collectibles as well, because those assets were related. In my assessment, there were people that were trying to either legitimize their holdings with something physical, or they just thought, well, gee, this is the house's money. I made this money. Let's spend it on something cool and nostalgic that has the potential to go up in value, or at least can be considered an alternate asset class.
Yeah, I mean, I can give like a number of one-off examples. You know, I'm in some like trophy discords in the Pokemon hobby where there were people buying $200,000 cards in crypto, and whether they were cashing out their crypto for some reason, or just they made a lot of money on crypto, so they were able to kind of speculate on Pokemon. They sort of took their winnings to then kind of speculate on Pokemon. I don't know, exactly. Um, but and I just have these one-offs, but it's an interesting relationship. If you look at sort of the, I'm not a big like trend graph guy,
No.
because I just think it's so much more important to understand the underlying, like, why this is happening, than just like, well, these two graphs look the same, so they're related. These kind of like correlations, but what's the actual causation? What's the actual takeaway? But it is interesting to look at sort of the graphs of the crypto market with the Pokemon market, and there's lots of similarities in terms of movement. Um, it's and sometimes with the stock market, but a lot of times sort of inverse.
Well, I can tell you there's a direct correlation with higher end collectibles, luxury collectibles, antiques in the stock market. When the economy's doing well, usually in most cases, those markets are booming.
Mm-hmm.
But if we even look at the high end art market, it's directly correlated with the overall strength of the economy in certain cases. That's why one thing we have to consider is we're moving into an uncertain time frame here. It used to be, the era of easy money is over. It used to be, you used to go to the market. My gosh, you could get a credit card if you had good credit for under 8%, and they would give you an introductory offer, no interest, for like 16 or 24 months.
Mm-hmm.
Car loans were like 3%. Mortgages were 3 to 4%. So now we're going into this era where rates are increasing exponentially. We don't know if we're going to hit a recession or if we're even already in a recession. What that's going to mean for not only the greater economy, but also the collectibles market.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what makes these markets more inherently risky as well.
Yeah, and it's hard to know how much these markets lag. And obviously, every recession is also different and impacts different parts of the economy in a different way. So it's so tough. And these markets were so much smaller back, in 2008. So it's like comparing, it's like, is it really a good comparison to see how it was impacted? That it's interesting. Yeah. So I don't know if you know. So I was a therapist for like 10 years, a mental health clinician, but recently I became a real estate investor, and so I'm heavy sort of into that market as an analyst now. So these are the conversations I'm having every day with people about interest rates, and inflation, and the impact on these markets. So
that is an interesting switch of careers. I will say that.
It is. I don't know if it'll be permanent, but for now.
You may need a therapist after becoming a real estate investor, but
Jen says, question: what about the inherent value of the gambling aspect of Pokemon that separates it from other collectibles?
you're referring to box breaks, the fact that you don't know what's in the box, that companies are putting in quote unquote rare cards, stuff like that. Of course it
Yeah.
contributes to it. It's called the gambler's premium. That's what we refer to it as. Of course it does. On the same token, though, I think it's getting a little bit ridiculous with extreme mass produced scarcity, with serialized cards we have coming out. This has really been happening for the longest time in the modern era sports world, where like you could literally get a refractor card that's one of one signed by the player, get it graded, and then go to the market and sell that card for like 40, 50, 60 grand in some cases. It's completely ridiculous to me. It honestly is a form of legalized gambling that I'm going to state something, and I know Jake probably won't agree with this. I honestly think it should be regulated.
Yeah, it's so like all these like online, these box breaks and all these things and all of the money and all the stuff that they're doing, like it's like loosely regulated in some cases by the by the company that owns the platform. In some cases, it's like not really regulated at all and not monitored at all. Yeah, but to have some sort of more formal government body regulate it, I don't know if I'm not for or against that. It really depends on what those regulations would look like. With all sort of government things. I'm not like government bad, but I'm also definitely not like government good. For me, it's always sort of a plan by plan, and often, unfortunately, things with good intentions from the government do too often lead to unintended consequences and issues and problems. But and because government is so slow to react to things and so political, it doesn't always do a good job of reacting in a way that's like best for the actual consumers, in sort of a sort of capitalistic sort of response that's actually best for the free market. So I don't know, but I would be certainly open, and I've talked a lot about it I talked about it 2 years ago, like when some of these channels started doing it, my concerns with the gambling, and there were people talking about that it's a good investment with the gambling. That's where I really had an issue. Like if you're a casino and you're telling people that it's a good investment to be at the craps table, you're lying. Like, the house always wins. Like, now in this, it's a little more complicated and difficult because, maybe, but certainly opening packs is not a good way to start your investment. Like, you're on average losing whatever it is, 30%, 50%, 80%, depending on the expected value from whatever pack you're opening. Two things I would say about this though is like I would say that I think that, and this goes to something you said earlier about like why you invest in maybe sealed. Like part of the value of sealed is it still has the gambler's premium
Yep.
attached to it, right? And so there's sort of that built into that. Now, I do also think that the gambling element can make items like that and other items more expensive than they should, or more speculative or unstable than they should, because how much money, because if people who are doing it are gambling or have gambling addictions, they're more likely to be leveraging themselves on credit cards and making poor financial decisions, which
Correct.
means more of a house of cards. So
Yep.
anything that gamblers are investing in, or gambler types, it's creating more of a debt house of cards by its very nature. So I think that it's sort of an interesting double-edged sword with some of that stuff. Like I do believe that gambling is a fun thing, and so um it's part of, like, I think human nature and human psychology. So I think that there's real fundamental value. It's not just like gambling bad, but gambling can also lead to, because it releases so much dopamine, it can release people to not be able to control themselves and then lose way more money than they want to or should, and cause a lot of problems. So
Spoken like a therapist.
I did addiction treatment for a couple of years. I did group therapy for adults in addiction. So
Makes sense.
I'm familiar with talking about this from that perspective. Um, all right. I have to be that we get a lot of like funny troll questions, not trying to be mean, but just trying to get me to like put them on screen and read them. So I have to read through them. Uh, let's see. Do you think that Gen Alpha will have an analog renaissance after being raised in an even more digital world, and therefore be even more interested in physical collectibles? Okay.
I honestly think I will say this. I was always against NFTs. I don't like cryptocurrency. You guys probably know if you watch my channel, my stance on those particular assets. I consider them extremely speculative. In certain instances, I honestly consider crypto to be a scam. It's the greatest scam ever perpetuated.
Me
It
too. I
almost
think the same thing.
reminds me of the dot-com era. Like going back to that time, just because a company was selling pet food online and they added .com to their name. Now they're worth like $100 million. And I think that everybody gets this wrong. Even if you agree with blockchain technology, if you are buying cryptocurrency, you are not technically investing in blockchain technology. You are buying a very speculative asset that most people will never ever need to own or use to go about their daily lives. So that's my warning on cryptocurrency first.
Yeah, I just think it's like if that happened, like I'm not so negative that I know that isn't going to happen, that I know that there isn't going to be a use case or a time where even some of the big ones become part of our daily life and more of a use case. But I'm very with you that like at best it's extremely speculative. And at worst, and pretty accurately, it's a giant pont like that, not Ponzi scheme, it's a giant manipulation and scheme by the people who bought in early in many cases. And we see this in everything. I mean, we get this in Pokemon hobby. I get people screaming at me and yelling at me because they just have a lot of money in something. They don't actually care about their, about it or their opinions. It's just all about the money. Um, it's I think that the topics of like the way the banking system has failed us and the move off the gold standard, like I think these are really interesting conversations, actually. And I think that there are some very smart people who are very interested in crypto having interesting conversations about how this stuff can revolutionize some of this. But a lot of it's just, excuse my language, BS. From my experience in these, I was in a lot of these like Clubhouse. I don't know if you know what Clubhouse is, Sean, but it was sort of this fad for a while, and there were a lot of these NFT, a lot of these NFT projects like launched in these Clubhouse rooms that I was listening to these conversations, and I was just stunned by no one was saying anything about the value of it. It was all like we're going to make a lot of money. Like it was, and to be fair, I invested a lot in Top Shot and these types of things early because the writing was on the wall. Like I'm not 100% against momentum investing when it's like extremely obvious and you basically can't lose because you're
Sure.
so early and you have such a competitive advantage. But it's not how I certainly don't long term invest. I'm a value investor all the way, and I big red flags, in a lot of conversations with people from those communities for me. So, as far as this question, I think it's interesting. So I guess the question's getting at like, um, because people are so in a digital world, they're going to want or crave the physical or something is going to be more meaningful in the future rather than the thesis that, well, kids aren't going to want physical cardboard because everything collectible is going to be online and NFTs, as you were kind of alluding to. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we're already seeing this. As physical media goes away, people are longing to collect it. Look at what's happening now with VHS grading, which I think is ridiculous. I've done videos on that. I am against cassette tape grading, VHS grading, laser disc grading, even CD grading is going to be a thing. And I honestly think it's going to extend to vinyl records. Now,
Hmm.
to be fair, vinyl records have been collected long before CDs, VHS tapes, and the like. So I
Mhm.
think if grading comes to vinyl records, it'll be interesting to see if the hardcore collectors that go after those particular types of products, meaning vintage vinyl records, are going to flock and accept third party grading.
Mhm.
I will tell you though, this is what's playing into. I don't know if you guys follow video games. A couple of weeks back, Nintendo announces, "Hey, we're shutting down the 3DS eShop." All of a
Mhm.
sudden, prices for physical 3DS games, I did a video on this, just started accelerating in value, and it's insane to me. Like, you are aware, even if they shut off the 3DS shop, it doesn't affect how much supply of the physical stuff is out there. There's no need to rush to buy it right away. And this is something that really worries me as an analyst and a consultant in these markets because it just seems to me that people are just starting to put the cart ahead of the horse.
Mhm.
It's insane. It's like, well, I got to get this. Otherwise, I'm never going to be able to get it again. That's 100% false. That is FOMO.
Mhm.
What I do see it being to the point where I do think that NFTs, I do think that digital collectibles are always going to be a thing because let's be realistic. These manufacturers don't have to put out a physical product. They save money if they go and they produce an NFT, a digital asset, and then they market it correctly and people buy it and people adopt into it. It's cheaper for them. But overall, I think that people, collectors in general, are always going to want the physical product. So I don't see that ever going away. I mean, if Pokemon, Magic the Gathering, tomorrow, if they decided, you know what, we're not going to put out pieces of cardboard anymore, they could do that and they would still make money. But they would lose the hardcore collecting base. And I think that's what drives a lot of this market. And that's what also drives a lot of people, no offense, to go out and hoard a lot of the sealed modern era stuff that's being pumped out. This also plays into, I'm sure that you're aware of this, Pokemon announced that they were increasing the print run of this stuff exponentially. And we haven't even seen the full effect of that yet. It's going to take years, if not decades, for us to discover, hey, back when they increased the print runs of this stuff was just being hoarded. Now, if we look at the depth of the market, there's tons of this stuff out there. Nobody really wants it. Or the market is able to absorb it. It's going to be one or the other.
Exactly. That's the big question. And that's what I always tell people is that we just don't know. And so when I sit down and do the math, and like part of my issue with like Rudy's like $300 video that always boosts approximately $300 is I sat down and did the math on the market cap. And again, market cap is not everything because something can be very thinly traded and can have a massive market cap and sustain that massive market cap if most people are holding the item. It's only when it's flooded, you know, the market is flooded that things tend to tank, right? So so that's why sometimes crazy huge market caps can last for an extremely long time, you know, and part of why bubbles can last for a really long time. But it's playing with fire and the confidence of people to say that they know or they, you know, I'm with you, Sean. That's exactly how I think of it. Well, these are the two options or somewhere in the middle. And well, Pokemon has stated that they're printing 9 times the amount, or it went from 1 billion cards to 9 billion cards in a year. And then they made 1.6 billion last year. And if they made 1.6 billion, the total company, the TCG is about 1/4 of the revenue. So that's 400 million. If the secondary market is 6 times the value that Pokemon is selling their original product for, that's 2.4 billion in market cap every year added to the market, theoretically, right? Doing some simple math. 200, if you take this is something I've said in the last couple of lives, but I haven't said it to you, Sean. If you add up every PSA card, vintage card from WotC right now, every card in every grade from all of the major sets, I did this 3-4 months ago or 4, maybe 6 months ago now. So it's a bit old. So it's definitely going to be higher now because a lot's been graded all the time. But it was something like 210 million. So if I'm right, and it really is 2 billion added market cap of new product every year, and you have only 400 million of every single PSA 10, PSA 9 of first edition, Shadowless, Jungle, Base, Fossil, like, these sets that are all way too expensive. And, it's like, I just don't know. And then you're adding in Lorcana and all the Disney movement and all the One Piece, and it's not just Pokemon. Like, I'm always amazed when people are like annoyed that I talk about other things outside of Pokemon. It's like all of these things are competing for a large group of people. Now, there's some people who are just Pokemon for sure. There's a lot of people who are just Pokemon, will only ever be Pokemon. But there's also a lot of people who are speculating and investing and putting money in all of these things, and they're constantly taking a look at their options. The more options there are, the more money eventually has to flow into all these things, and it's going to be harder and harder to sustain.
But you know what's really sad about this whole thing?
Yeah.
Back when collectible card games first premiered, like when Magic the Gathering first premiered, or even when Pokemon first premiered, you literally catered to the players. And as a result, they were turned into collectors and they loved the product. Today, it seems to me, like with Flesh and Blood, with MetaZoo, if you want to appeal to the bottom line and really have your card game last, you have to kind of appeal more to the speculators and investors, not just the collectors and gamers. And I consider that very sad because that's pretty much how all these markets end up. It's just like if you're going to produce comic books, like Marvel, even DC. They have to introduce new characters, and they have to either short run, meaning short produce that comic book that particular new character is featured in, or they have to do some stupid, crazy 1 out of 100 variant that's either hollow foil or done in a certain way. So that little Timmy can go to the store, buy that comic book, send it to a grading company, and feel that he has something that's valuable. Because let's be realistic, how many people are going to open up that comic book and read it? Very few. And that's where we are in this market. And that's what pains me.
I'm with you. It's two things, right? One, it's frustrating and painful to see people who don't have a lot of money lose their money or maybe spend it not wisely. It's a painful thing to see. And but the point that you made, which I really agree with too, is that just as like I want to buy and enjoy the hobby, and I don't want to be surrounded by all the nonsense investing talk and all the nonsense. It gets tiring. It gets grating. Sort of I find 3 years on YouTube now at times. Um, it's like it just be nice. It's such a pleasure when you're talking to people and you're engaged with people who are and this is really going to offend people, but who are, a bit nuanced and a bit sort of maybe a little bit, but also love it and love the stuff. And I hate talking to people who aren't nuanced, and I don't even feel really love the stuff. Like if the love isn't there,
Yeah, yeah.
because I started this channel to help collectors navigate the financial market. I did not start this channel fundamentally to help people make money to then take out of the hobby. That's not my passion. My passion is in growing the hobby and growing the market but doing it in a way that's with people who are real collectors, who are really passionate about it and who want to be here long term. And yeah, it does get frustrating, but it's a natural, it just is always going to be that way. It feels, it's just sort of a natural thing, I guess.
Did you happen to see the article by chance? There was an article that came out, and I've been meaning to do a video on it. I just haven't had time. It was about how the toy market is now catering to adult consumers, where adult consumers pretty much make up like 40 to 50% of the overall toy market, where they're just going into the market, they're buying this stuff, keeping it sealed, putting it on a shelf, either speculating on it or buying it in certain cases just because they love it. And when you kind of look at the demographics, are kids even playing with action figures anymore? I don't, I know nobody in my immediate family or even friends that have kids that tell me, hey, he really wanted this particular action figure, this series. And on Christmas Day, he gets it and rips it open and plays with it. The only thing that I see that happening with is Lego or video games.
Mhm.
That's very sad for that market going forward.
Mhm.
Because I'm sure you're around, maybe we're 10 years apart. I don't know. I'm 46.
Mhm.
But you probably remember Star Wars or G.I. Joe or Masters of the Universe. You got it, you opened it up and you played with it and you enjoyed it. It just doesn't seem like today's kids are doing that anymore. It just, something's changed. It's like they want Nintendo, they want an iPhone, a PlayStation 5, whatever it is.
It's just so hard to compete with the dopamine rush of the video game. It's and with virtual reality, I mean, it's just going to get more immersive and more very difficult to compete. But I think it's also a very interesting point, and really goes to the question we were just trying to answer, which is that will all of that then cause at some point sort of a move back to like, gosh, I'm feeling, will this stuff lead to mental health problems that then eventually lead us back to it? And I think the instinct that it will lead to some mental health problems is almost definitely correct, because frankly any new change leads to some mental health problems. But what I think sometimes it's a little bit putting the cart before the horse. This is my personal opinion about like the damage that all this is going to do. And I think it's very hard for us as people who, because we have a nostalgia for playing with those things, like we want to see kids do it because that's cool and that makes us connect to that generation. Like, but I'm also with you, Sean. Like I do worry. I do think that there's actually legitimate reasons outside of just we wanting what we enjoyed to sort of continue, but also like the merits and the positives of that sort of play therapy, that sort of play versus video game play.
Well, even while we're on this topic, how does it affect like the decline of Toys R Us and toy stores? You know, it used to be
Oh
as
my
a
gosh.
kid, you used to go into this amazing big box store and you
Yeah.
would see GI Joe or Star Wars or whatever it was, Transformers piled up to the ceiling.
Yeah.
It was incredible. Now what do kids do? Mom, can you buy me that? Okay, click a button here. It comes in a box, dropped in your front porch, and it's like, oh, this isn't that exciting.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the more that we get used to, I mean, human beings, we're all, everything is relative. Like our realities are relative. So
True.
when we get everything immediately, it no longer feels exciting. Or but if now we have to go back or revert to a slower, or I have to wait in lines, like we're it's much harder for us to be sort of capable of that. So the more we become connected to this speed and this technology, logically speaking, you know, theoretically and probably in reality and what we're seeing, you know, we're becoming more um used to, and sort of dependent might be a strong word, but certainly used to and comfortable with the speed and the ease of things, and uncomfortable, maybe more uncomfortable with sort of struggle. And you know, at the same time, though, a lot of this technological advancement has like helped with all sorts of problems in the world, and has extended our lives. You know, I do think the sort of like happiness and mental health part of this is sort of that part where it's going to be like an ongoing discussion for the next 50 years in psychology, and also in like in the field of psychology, and then also in just like the general public. But it's also interesting to think about how that will impact, going back to what we're talking about here, sort of the market, you know, and have um, market impacts. I do think that people like change overall, and one thing I talk a lot about, and one thing that I think makes these markets so hard to predict, is that what is popular now, it's just like amazing how quickly people can shift, and sort of the narrative can shift. It's like this is like going to change everything and is like the most important thing, and then it's this thing is like a terrible villain, and then it's like this thing's okay, well this thing is amazing, well this thing's horrible. You know, it's like it's really interesting. And from a market perspective, I try to take advantage of that by buying when people are irrationally negative and selling when people are irrationally exuberant, which is sort of the whole value investing thesis. You know, as best I can. So I imagine you do the same.
Pretty much, yeah.
um, okay, let's see what else we got here. Um, Beek says, when in your experience, Sean, does a collecting category start to wane away from the greater fool theory, where you can be confident that what you're buying will be worth more 10 years from now?
There are no guarantees because it's all based on the greater fool theory. There's no guarantee, and I use this example, and people love to argue with me on this. At some point, I'm here to tell you, an Action Comics 1, a Detective Comics 27 will hit their peak, and guess what? Sales after that, they may eventually spike back up again, but they're going to hit their peak to the point where that's it. That's all the market's going to bear. It happens in antiques. It happens in rare coins even. There's certain coins that have been sold to the market. Every time they come up, they sell. People can predict what it's going to sell for just based on looking at other items that sold similar in the past. So at some point, these markets are going to hit their peak. There is no guarantee in the antiques and collectibles trade. It's just like Harry Rinker says. There's really no such thing as a blue chip collectible. At some point, it is going to die out, most likely. Even antiques don't always survive. Just because something made the level to the point where it's considered an antique, meaning it's 100 years of age of older, and people actively collect it, at some point, if we go far enough into the future, it's going to become irrelevant, no matter what you're buying. You need to realize that.
And I try to, yeah, I think that so this idea of like I buy something and then I need to find someone else to pay more for it, right? Is the greater
Correct.
fool theory. And it's not always bad, and it's not always like, I think sometimes people hear the greater fool theory and I think they think like scam, and they're not the same thing.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so I think it's really an important distinction. And you are not necessarily a greater fool if you buy something for more than someone did before. But it's really important to understand what's happening and the difference between productive assets and non-productive assets. So assets that if you own a business or a farm is a good example, is one that Warren Buffett uses, which is just a nice, easy example. If I own a farm, I can sell that farm to the next person for more, which in some ways works similarly to sort of the greater fool theory. Theoretically, if it's the exact same farm and it's producing the exact same amount, I could sell that exact same farm for more. Similarly, as I could take the exact same card, the exact same item, and I could sell it to the next person for more. But the farm is also, if it's a is also going to be producing milk and eggs and whatever, and lots of different things that you can then sell, and that have value, ideally value that's like tied to like eating, breathing, shelter, physiological human needs that are crucial, that come before or should come before, don't always come before. Pokemon cards don't always, food doesn't always come before Pokemon cards, unfortunately, but it should, but for people. And I think understanding those concepts, and I 100% agree with you, and I'm so glad you answered it that way. It's like there's always that risk. There's always, and you talk about like established markets and kind of trying to differentiate an established market from a speculative market, and I think some people mishear that as like once it's established, it's now forever sort of up. It's
There's no guarantee.
yeah. It's not really, correct me if I'm wrong, it's not really that a market is established or unestablished. It's a spectrum. It's a phrase to help people think about, this one is more established than this one.
Correct. It's just like what I teach in my channel. There's three markets that govern the overall antiques and collectibles trade:
Yeah.
speculative, established, and then mature and sophisticated.
Okay.
We're talking rare coins or artwork. Those markets have been around for hundreds, in some cases thousands of years. That's mature or sophisticated.
Sure.
Pokemon, that's only been with us since 1998, 1999. That's that's speculative. There's no other way to pretty much.
And let's add cards. Cards have been around since like, tobacco cards, right? I mean, playing cards are actually, you know, 500. I mean, I think even older. I forget
Oh yeah,
exactly, but
oh yeah.
very, very old. But the collectible cards, like the tobacco card, the first ones from like 1960 or excuse me, 1860 something, I think, or something like that. And so it's what, 150, 160 years old. So that's obviously a lot older than Pokemon, people collecting cards and these types of things.
Yeah.
Yeah. But still it's not as old as currency and books, things like books, yeah.
And
Uh,
when we look at like sports cards, we actually divide that up in the
sure.
trade. Like if you're talking like an Onus Wagner card,
Mhm.
that's established, that market. If
Sure.
you're talking about modern era sports cards, though, that are being printed today and have been printed probably within the last 20 years, that's very speculative. That's on par again with Pokemon Magic the Gathering. It's too new.
Mhm.
Even comic books, pre 1965 comic books, a lot of experts in the trade are now considering to be established. However, your giant size X-Men 1 or Amazing Spider-Man 300, they're very speculative. And just because something is established doesn't mean there's a guarantee there.
Mhm.
It just means when we look back over the long haul, people have been attracted to it and wanted to buy it.
Mhm.
Therefore, you're better off going after that item per se over the long term than that of a more speculative item. But you
Mhm.
can still make money on the speculative thing and you can still lose money on the established collectible.
Mhm.
Again, there's no guarantees.
I think that it's just about your risk reward sort of analysis, and obviously, depending on the category, there's going to be a very different risk involved,
Correct.
um, but also potential reward. I mean, the speculative markets can have a lot more reward. So,
Definitely. But then you also have to figure, though, when you go to sell on the secondary market, collectibles have inherently higher costs than that of stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and ETFs. I mean, let's be realistic. If you go through Vanguard or T. Rowe Price or Fidelity or Charles Schwab and you buy an index fund, I think the highest cost is 0.04%, which comes out to $40 on a $100,000 investment per year. That's all they're making off you. If you have $100,000 in the S&P 500. And when you go to sell that, all you do is click the button. You pretty much know the price you're going to get, whatever it's at that particular point in time. Collectibles, on the other hand, when you go to the market, you usually have to pay a significant premium to the auction house. There's a lot of costs there that people don't realize. And also there's no guarantee what you're going to get, because when you're consigning these items, if you are consigning to auction, it's usually a lead-in. There's like 3 to 6 months in before it's going to go up at auction. Well, anything can happen in the interim to that market. So they are more inherently risky and more costly as well.
Yeah.
I'm surprised nobody brought up the vault yet. I'm waiting to get questions on eBay Vault. That's a particular talking point.
We can talk about that too anytime you want, Sean. We don't need to wait for a question if you're interested in bringing something up about it. Do you want to talk about it now?
Sure. I always thought that was an interesting concept because, again, eBay is very smart in this. Pretty much, they're getting money on both ends of the transaction, and they're able to sell that same collectible again and again. It makes perfect sense why auction houses and companies are doing this. Because let's be really honest here. If somebody comes into this market and let's say they spend $5,000, it doesn't even have to be a Pokemon card. It could be a sports card, whatever it is, a credit card. We'll use that as an example. And their car breaks down, and now they need money. And that card that they bought on eBay is now sitting in the eBay vault. It's an abstract asset. They're not getting cash flow out of it. They're not getting sent a brokerage statement that says the item did the investment did this, and it paid you X number of dollars a dividend for that quarter. So what do you think little Timmy or Kimmy or Poindexter Jr. is going to do? Well, it's very easy to go to eBay and say, we'll sell that card. It's brilliant that auction companies came up with this concept. Am I against it? I think it's horrible for the average consumer. I honestly do, because they're not even taking ownership of the item they're buying. That's just my opinion.
I know some people who use it because they travel a lot, and they just want to flip, basically, but it is, I mean, we can add, it's certainly different, but it's, the similar sort of topic of like never actually physically holding the item, but, fractional ownership companies that are trying to come out and create.
Oh, yes.
Definitely interesting stuff. And I can see a place and a value for it. I think, though, that a lot of this stuff is really going to depend on, can these companies provide enough real value to people in the long run and do it at a cost-effective enough way for themselves that they can continue to sustain the service, that it continues to make sense.
Yep.
I think eBay Vault is definitely going to be successful. It's like a no-brainer. I think these fractional ones, though, are more sort of like, is that a business model in collectibles that's really going to be popular enough that you can get enough people using it, that it can be legitimate enough that, and because you need to put transaction fees and all sorts of things, and when you're adding all of that into it, it's like, is it fun enough? Is it interesting enough for people to own fractional shares of these things, for people to do that? I'm just not sure. I have because I think when you buy it, even though it's in the vault, you still feel more of a sense of ownership for sure.
Correct.
Than you do with the fractional, because you can pull it out of the vault, right? I mean, it is your item, you own it. The fractional stuff is very sort of,
I'm against all that. I'll be 100% honest, because what you're doing is you're already taking an illiquid item, a collectible, and you're making it more illiquid, and then you're wrapping management fees around it.
Yeah.
Realistic. It makes no sense to me why anybody would invest in that matter. And I lose a lot of respect for a lot of these YouTubers that continue to plug these services simply because they're you know what I mean? They're getting a payday.
Sure.
I mean, I'll watch financial YouTubers and they'll be plugging it. I'm like, what are you doing, dude? You're talking finance. You should know better than this.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if I'm fundamentally against it.
Fair enough.
Um, but it would all depend on the fees and the credibility, and I'm just not sure it's viable. Like, I'm more in the camp of, like, I'm just not sure it's a viable thing that that would be good. Like, the ones that have come out, I won't name their names, the fees were crazy, the prices were insane,
Absolutely.
and it just they were just bad. Like, I can't I it's negative, so strong negative interest, right, in being a part of that. But the idea of, like, fractionalizing to make your item a lot more liquid and many people could own it, if the fees were small enough and you were able to, like, you know I'm sure it's going to be blockchain, and there was able to be some sort of ownership experience, and you could look at the car. Like, if the fees were low enough, I could see a way that that would be enjoyable for
Sure.
people potentially and successful and sort of a win-win. And I'm not theoretically against anything that's a win-win. In that sense, I'm definitely like fairly on the free market side of, like, I believe that things over time, bad businesses will go out of bit. If it doesn't work and people don't enjoy it, there's only so much. There's only so long that manipulation works and predatory business practices. The problem is, in the long run, I don't believe these things work. I tend to be pretty optimistic about these things, but in the short run, they're devastating. In the short run, they, like, ruin people, and there are people who don't recover from scams. Like, in the wake, eventually the thing goes out of business, but in the wake, it a scammy person and a scammy business, they will get found out, but they can take a lot of people down with them. I mean, we see FTX, what happened with something like that, or we see these examples, of the huge negative impact they can have on so many people's lives, even if eventually they can't succeed because they don't have they have a flawed business model, or whatever it is. And that's why I'm with, that's where that regulation comes in, and where is that sort of appropriate regulation? Um,
I don't think grading companies should be allowed to own auction houses
yeah,
either. I think it's ridiculous that
yeah,
we're at a point where, well,
it's
we separate everything. Don't worry, we're not affiliated. It's a separate company.
yeah,
It's ridiculous. You know how easy it is to pretty much. That's all I'm gonna say.
yeah, yeah. I agree. I mean, I think it's quite questionable, and um, I would rather things just be. I'm more on the side of, like, let's develop good systems so that encourage people to behave well rather than trusting people to behave well, in a sort of like, hey, you could easily cheat me and I'll never know about it. You'll never get caught and you'll make a lot more money, but you won't do it because you're a good person. Like, that's a recipe for disaster. um, all right, Jen asks, what about the impact of PokeRev and how it impacts the younger generation? Are you familiar with PokeRev?
I am not actually.
So PokeRev is one of the biggest and certainly the fastest growing Pokemon YouTube channel. Mostly opening, maybe all opening product at this point. I'm not sure.
Wow.
Opening product, doing live streams, opening product. Used to do a ton of that. Now I think it's mostly like opening mystery boxes and doing, like, different kind of fun challenges and but it's, opening product and sort of the excitement of opening product. And Jen is asking, what a channel like that. There are videos that get, and there are other channels too that get 4 million views, 5 million views on a video. These types of views for this type of content, right? So, like, we're talking massive views. How does that impact the younger generation? Do you think it impacts the younger generation?
Oh, of course it does. Watching that in real time, that definitely has an impact. It also plays into Gamers Premium, right?
Yeah, I think this. I mean, it's massive, and it's part of why I'm such a big believer that the stuff that they show, the amount of, like, free publicity and advertisement for that product, um, is massive. And so it's interesting, like, the things that they say and the things that they do can have such a significant impact on the market. Um, yeah,
And it's very interesting because they wield a lot of power.
so much.
Yes, that's what's scary.
Yeah.
They can pretty much set the market. They're market makers at that particular point.
Justin Durst says this dude is so accurate. It's not even funny. Probably one of the best guests you've ever had on your channel, Jake.
Thank you. A
Yeah,
lot of experience.
it's a pleasure talking to someone a little older too. Most of the people I have on my channel are my age or younger. With a little bit more experience in these, and from a different decade of collectibles experience. And it's important to there aren't that many people like that, obviously, in Pokemon, because when Pokemon was really popular, I was the oldest,
You understand. I understand. My
generally.
nephew was into it. That's how I got into it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
my nephew, I'm 46, my nephew is 30.
Yeah.
You can kind of do the math where how I got involved. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. And I also liked video games. I will admit, video games are in my blood. Nintendo, all that stuff.
I like that stuff too. Um, although I was sort of more on the I like playing them more than collecting them thing, but I also like collecting them. I just didn't like them as much as the market did.
Fair
It's
enough.
unfortunate when that happens. It's like, yeah, I think this is really cool and I really like it, but not for like $5,000. I
Yeah,
just,
insane.
you know, but but I'm a crazy guy who's willing to pay $5,000 for a card.
Fine.
So, um, let's see. What is the most tall tale sign of an emerging market manipulation? What are some signs of market manipulation?
Oh gosh, you got to look at price points, meaning if something shoots up in value really quickly, you got to start asking why. And that's when you start to roll back the scenes. You can pretty much see it. Like that's how a lot of us knew about the great video game bubble that was occurring. We rolled back the scenes and we looked at the major players that were behind it, or who all is buying this stuff. Where's it going? If people are solely talking about money, that's a major sign that something's amiss. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean market manipulation. That can also mean a speculative bubble. But what you really got to do is you just got to be looking for any type of hype that is being put out there, whether it be by grading companies, auction companies, or again, market makers. That can pretty much point you towards it. That's a big sign. Like I knew with graded video games, it wasn't fully organic because a lot of auction companies were really hyping this stuff. And what would happen too is there was a crossover factor with a lot of comic book players, comic book collectors, I should say, trying to get involved in this particular market. As a matter of fact, a lot of dealers to this day in the comic book space also offer a lot of graded games on their websites. Now, how does a comic book dealer get into that market so quickly to capitalize on that bubble? There has to be somebody behind the scenes going, hey, this is going to be the next big thing. You've got to carry that. You've got to get involved in this market. Comic books and video games are two separate collecting categories entirely. That really raised suspicion. So that's why sometimes when you have all these people coming into a market, I've said this, it is not a good thing.
Hmm.
It's a good thing if you're selling. But if you're trying to buy or look at where that market's going to be in 6 months or 6 years, it makes it very difficult. The water gets murky.
I think it's sort of it's always that line of like, am I being a conspiracy theory? Am I going
Exactly.
into it's that line of like, well, okay, I bought this card for $200 6 months ago, and now I'm selling it for 6,000. Okay, is there a person who bought a large position in it and now is buying some to manipulate that market up, and then will sell into that to other people who will kind of fall for that, maybe at a slightly lower price? Or is it or but it's weird to me when I see that, why they wouldn't start at a lower price. Like, why you don't need to pay that much. All of the people who are selling it at those really high prices were probably willing to sell it at much lower prices. So I it's strange, but I will tell you that they've gone up since then. You know, um, it's not a situation where someone like manipulated one price point and then the next few sold under it at pushed up by that price point. Um, it's always a risk is what I would say, and people do gross things, and people don't even think that's gross. Like, some people, like, they're just like, "It's I can do whatever I want," and this is just sort of like, I think that's just a gross way to interact with this hobby and try to manipulate people's emotions and feelings by fake bidding on items and fake buying items and doing all this gross stuff. Like, in any other market, it would be you'd be in jail. Like, it's just
Correct.
like complete fraud.
I usually tell people when people start coming in trying to invest in this stuff, setting up LLCs, that's
Yeah,
when you should probably use caution.
yeah.
And unfortunately, that's becoming the norm though in collectibles, right? I mean, I have people even coming to me, Sean, I want to invest in video games. I'm going to set up an LLC. Can you help me do this? Can you help me walk me through the steps? And it's like, really? It's like, I can, but are you sure you want to go this route? What's the purpose here? If you want to buy some stuff and try to invest in it, just do it that way. You don't need to set up an LLC right away. You can see if it takes hold first. It's insane. Some of the questions I get asked.
Thoughts on sports? Oh, how are we doing for time, by the way?
I'm
Um,
fine if you are. I'm
are
okay.
you good?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm enjoying it, and people are asking some good questions. I should probably try to go in roughly 30 minutes, but I am notorious for saying that, and then we're just in a really good conversation, and I just kind of keep it going. So let me know when you're tired and when you need to end for sure. Okay.
I'm used to doing 1 a.m. rants, so you guys know me that watch my.
I'm up late too. I tend to be yeah, I tend to do a lot of work at pretty late. Okay, so thoughts on sports ticket stubs and movie ticket stubs being graded. What are your thoughts?
I see a need for it because it has to be authenticated in some manner. That said, it's not as mainstream as like graded cards, coins, comics, other collectibles. I mean, right now, one of the big things in the market is if you're a grading company and you can establish yourself, you pretty much have a license to print money. So they're literally going to be trying to grade everything. Everything from toys, Funko Pops are being graded for crying out loud. I mean, it's insane. I wouldn't be surprised if some of these companies start to experiment with like Beanie Babies or something that came from yesteryear, just trying to see if the market takes, if they do it, if they offer like some type of, esoteric grading on some of this stuff. It's insane. But
Yeah, I
that's
mean,
what
it's funny when we talk about Beanie Babies because, like, I think if a company could create a scarce version of that and hit the nostalgia of that again in a way that was actually very controlled, and I don't know if it needs to be a stuffed animal or a card or a toy or like whatever it would be, but I could see that easily popping up. It's funny how like everyone's so like, well, Beanie Babies were worthless and no one likes. Like, people loved Beanie Babies.
Yep.
People have a ton of nostalgia for Beanie Babies. It was just it wasn't a built out world, and the guy was more focused on selling the narrative of rarity and scarcity than actually creating it and sustaining it and creating story. Like, I think it was mismanaged potentially, whatever. Uh, as far as like ticket stubs and movie tickets, I think they're cool actually. As far as grading them, like, I like them because they're from a moment in history, and as a collector, that I respond to that. I think that's cool. Like, having the first like a ticket to one to like the first showing of
Mhm.
like the Star Wars movie, or a ticket to a huge sports game that I remember that I watched, or that I particularly if that ticket, like, some of the tickets are really beautiful, like sports tickets to like a Super Bowl or to a all-star NBA game or something. They're really beautiful looking also, so there's like an aesthetic value. I'm sure it's extremely speculative, and I don't know the market really well, but and who knows how many are out there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
It's a
But
niche market, and I will say the market's better for, like, major sporting events that people
yeah,
have an attachment to. Obviously, those particular pieces are gonna be closer to
yeah,
achieving higher prices than just, like, your average movie stub or something of that nature.
yeah,
So there is a need for it. I get that, and it is organic. It's just a very niche market.
yeah. There's so much stuff. um, um, Jen asks, how can we say that, or how can I say, maybe directed to me, that everyone is bullish when the only bullish people are just some collectors? Um,
Well, I think I can kind of answer this if I see where
sure.
the particular individual is going. I think if you look at the amount of price appreciation that occurred in the Pokemon space just within the last few years, I think there are a lot of people that are extremely bullish on Pokemon. Do I think there should be more caution in the market? Absolutely. No market can go up indefinitely forever. It doesn't work that way. And a lot of these strategies that we've adopted the last few years, where we're just going to hoard everything and we're going to keep it sealed. I get what you guys are saying. Some of you argue against me on my channel where you state, well, Sean, you're not taking into account new collectors that are coming into the market. And I have to state the depth of the market is going to be even greater because of the amount of people that are hoarding this stuff. It's always going to be available. Doesn't mean you can't make money on it, but it's not going to be the surefire investment that I think a lot of you guys think. And the case is more where I'm in the middle. I'm not bearish like a lot of you guys think, but I'm also not bullish. I'm cautious.
777 takes says the Pokemon is the tip of the collectible speculation iceberg, but somehow still not quite bullish. So I mean, my feeling is that Pokemon is an incredible IP and it has incredible fundamentals and long lasting, but is also in many ways one of the tips of the speculative bubble at the same time. So how do you make sense of both? That's my personal opinion. How do you make sense of both those things? You end up somewhere in the middle. You end up, well, I don't think this is a tulip bubble mania. I don't think that people don't care about these items and that there isn't genuine joy and community and fun being had in these areas. And I think it's global and massive, and I think it's going to get bigger over time. And I think the prices that things are going for and people have put in are already are so over. But we'll see. We'll see how all of that goes. So it's sort of a trust me, if I was, and this is where people say things to me like, how can you have $1 million in Pokemon or collectibles, Jake, but be so bearish? And it's like, well, I've carefully selected and bought many different collectibles from many different hobbies while also having a stock portfolio and a real estate portfolio and all of these things that I'm constantly managing. And I'm constantly selling things when I feel like they're too high. And then I'm buying things that I think are undervalued. And I'm constantly sort of managing that, which shows that fundamentally, I don't believe that it's a complete tulip bubble, that cards are worthless. I do think there is a tiny chance of that. I do think I'm most worried about the cardboard super bubble in general rather than any specific thing, in part because I have so many things from so many different cards, going back 100 plus years. So, but I'm not, but I am long term bullish enough when you also add in the fact that I love this stuff and that I'm a collector and that I can afford it because I'm managing my risk by putting my money into these other things and diversifying within collectibles as well, to some degree. So
I would agree. I do think, though, that there are some tremendous risks in these markets because I do believe that this too shall pass. That's one of my favorite sayings in the antiques and collectibles trade
yeah,
because the whole market is geared towards change. If you
yeah.
go back, I bring this up as an example on my channel from time to time. I don't know how much of a fan you are of the Christmas movie, A Christmas Story. I always thought that was an excellent movie
Like,
because it shows a time in a particular person's life where things are relevant and very important that
mm,
make no sense in the year 2023. Like I brought this up before. Anybody in this chat, do you guys collect Daisy, Red Ryder BB guns? Believe it or not, they were once a thing and people did collect them. Today, in the year 2023, not so much. A lot of people don't drink Ovaltine. A lot of people don't know who Annie Oakley is. A lot of people aren't waiting to get an Annie Oakley
mm.
decoder ring in the mail. So it's kind of interesting how cultural relevance changes over time. And you have to have that particular mindset in focus if you're going to invest in these things. Because right now, I'm going to be very honest, there's a company out there that is creating the next big thing that is going to come into this market. It's going to be collected, it's going to be huge. And potentially, it could eat away at the demographics of Pokemon or Magic the Gathering or comic books or whatever it is. Because remember, collectors, even investors, no matter who they are, they still have a budget. So if you're able to go to the market and you're able to spend, I'll just use this as an example. Let's say that you're somebody that spends $1,000 a month on any type of collectible, any type of item you want to own or invest in. If something else comes out now that you want to gear money towards, that's going to come out of that budget. So now if you're spending $1,000 between Pokemon and Magic the Gathering, well, if you're going to go after this other thing, you're going to have to spend less on those particular collectibles.
Mm-hmm.
So that will affect the market going forward. And I don't think a lot of people that are all in, that are really, really bullish, they don't think that these particular time frames that we're in are going to pass or they're going to change. They will always. The only constant to life is change. That's just my perspective. I don't know if you agree with me on that, but that's just what I see being
certainly.
In
I mean, given enough time, you're sort of like everything will, has this is something Dan, my Patreon partner, Catch 'em All Collectibles, he says that all the time. He says that it's all going to zero eventually. Right? That exactly that exact idea. And then the question is sort of, well, and you mentioned this yourself, like Pokemon has these seemingly positive demographics going for them in terms of age, in terms of income. But what about cards? And this is where I keep going back to more of like cards. So Pokemon cards maybe specifically, but what about cards in general? And then do cards in general need to continue to be popular for Pokemon cards to be popular? Maybe, maybe not to some degree. It's how much of this market is being bolstered and pushed up by general sports card collectors and all, and non-sports card collectors from all sorts of hobbies. I don't know.
Well, you bring up a good point because there's one thing that we got to take into account here when we talk about the card super bubble, right?
Yeah.
If you look at what's happening with the prices for some of this like failed TCGs that came out over the years, like I remember I was a huge fan. I'm going to really date myself here. I remember when Magic the Gathering came out, there was a card game that was called Jihad that was on the market made by Wizards of the Coast. And later they changed the name to be more politically correct to Vampire. I loved that particular card game.
I think I have a box of that back there somewhere. I think.
Oh, it's incredible. The artwork, it really pulled me in. Like it was with vampires. It even had, I remember one of the cards quoted like 9 Inch Nails from Head Like a Hole. The lyrics were on it. It was just so ahead of its time, I thought. And I really loved it. And I was going through eBay one day and I said, you know what? I wonder what some of these particular booster boxes go for. And they're not exactly selling for extremely high price points, but they are selling for a lot more than what I expected. So when we talk about like a card super bubble, I honestly think that that's part of it. That's a sign that points to something's definitely going on in this space because a lot of these older card games, even like Wyvern's one, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. Wyvern was also back in the day.
I'd say Wyvern, but I have no idea. Yeah.
That's one too that has a little bit of value, not much, but people are still buying it in this day and age. And it kind of makes me wonder, why are people going after this stuff now? Is it because there's genuine interest? Or is it because other YouTubers and people are saying, well, look at this. This came out in 1994 or 1995 and this failed. I got to get in just in case it does end up going up in value. And that's what causes me to be even more cautious when I see stuff like that. Because I can't imagine too many people getting nostalgic for a card game that only lasted like 1 or 2 years that they no longer print. Somebody has to be bringing that to someone's attention.
Yeah, I think, so there's certainly kind of like the chase for the next thing, right? It's like, well, I already missed the boat on this, so I'm going to get in early on this, right? The question is, and I guess how I look at these things is like, number one, I need a massive IP if I'm going to actually seriously look at something that isn't established. Like Magic the Gathering is the only thing that I ever put any money into that does not have a massive IP and a world and a big fan base. And the reason I state it again is because I just think it's historic. I also think Middle Earth is awesome and was a great card game and is Lord of the Rings, and that has like basically no value and no collector base. So it's interesting. Kind of Magic is very interesting why it was successful in the early years. And you, I'm sure, know a lot more than I do about that. I'm definitely not a Magic expert or even probably a intermediate, by any means. But there's something cool and special about that, I feel, in sort of the TCG history. But outside of that, it's like, when I speculate or go for like, I have like, Star Wars cards around. Here's like a Forrest Whitaker, autograph, you know, out of 25, right? I've got this, and then I've got, 1935 Disney gum ink, 1940 Superman. I see value in it all, and it all kind of depends on price point. But what I look for is definitely big IP, rarity, some sort of historic significance that I think this item will stand the test of time in some sort of way and will be important to people for some reason down the line. Um, but I agree with you. It's very hard to predict that, and also it's hard to see why Wyvern would have that, or why, like, even if it's really cool art with cool dragons, and let's say it does have this cool art style and it's dragons, and so maybe it should have some value. And let's say that cards continue to become more popular and be a huge collectible, and let's say that era of cards becomes really famous and popular for like TCGs. And so all of the TCGs and the dead CCGs, and we're also talking about like all the Decipher, you know, um, different Decipher games. CCG Star Wars has become quite expensive, but like all of these types of games do become like there are a lot of like non-sports TCG card collectors, let's say. I could see how this stuff could have some long-term value, but I think it's pretty far down the line. Wyvern and these types of things are pretty far down the line. Um, and if they're going for 200, $300, it's just like, yeah, I kind of agree with you. It's like that feels mania. But do I think that's more crazy than the $7,000, $5,000 Pikachu promos? It's all crazy to me, honestly,
It
Sean.
is.
Like, I think those things are equally crazy for different reasons. Um, I think the Kakawa Disney stuff going, being worth nothing basically. I don't. Are you familiar with that? With what's happening with that set?
Little
You
bit,
know,
yes.
and then all these YouTubers are opening it and talking about it and hyping it up, and like I've heard, I don't know if this is true or not, but I've heard rumors it's not even an official Disney product, like licensed product. Which, if that's true, I have no idea what, that just adds a whole other layer of like,
The ramifications are gonna be severe because Disney is very sue happy.
yeah, I don't know. But yeah, it's like, why is that? I mean, I guess you could argue it's going to be it's some of the first ever serialized Disney cards. Is it?
If
I'm
it's
trying to
not
think.
licensed, it's not.
What?
If it's not licensed, it's not.
Yeah.
That's
Um,
scary.
I don't know. Yeah. All right. Let's see what else we got here. Um, XP says you talk about irrational exuberance and negativity, but what about ignorance about a TCG or collectible? When do you invest in an old TCG or not, i.e., Nightmare Before Christmas? Well, this is perfect based on what we were just talking about. Um,
I honestly would not recommend investing in older TCGs that didn't catch on.
hmm.
It's pretty much you're hoping for a dead cat bounce. Let's be realistic. It, unless if you really like it or have an attachment to it, I wouldn't try investing in it because what's going to cause a catalyst in the market that's going to cause that to spike, where everybody's going to want to go after it all of a sudden after all these years. It's the
you,
player base is long gone.
you need to have a theory, in my view. And if you have a theory that makes some sense and it's very rare and it's very cheap, it could be worth it. So, for example, if you're buying things that there's 20 in the world of or 50 in the world of for $5, and you have a reasonable theory how that could be worth 5,000 or 10,000 in the future, even if you think it's a 1 out of 100 chance, that's not a bad investment from a mathematical sort of risk reward perspective. If you can find items that are actually like that. Now, do I think it's likely that it will hit? you know, Probably very unlikely in most situations. Again, you could have theory like, well, I know that they're going to come out with movies. Like, let's say with this Nightmare Before Christmas. First of all, the Nightmare Before Christmas, I think, is a really cool box. I enjoy. I've opened some Nightmare Before Christmas. I think they're cool cards. I think the box looks really cool, but there seems to be a massive amount of that. Does not seem to be an item that there's very little of. And Nightmare Before Christmas is like people like Nightmare Before Christmas, but is that a major IP? Is that something where you have Disney or major companies putting in millions of dollars and investing millions of dollars to grow that brand? Maybe they'll make a Nightmare Before Christmas, another Nightmare Before Christmas movie. Maybe, right? But will they make a bunch? Will they make a TV show? Extremely unlikely. Is that a world that you think they're going to explore, like Star Wars and Marvel or some of these other IPs? Probably unlikely. Um, and when you add that with the fact that like the box was printed in a time where there's tons of all these boxes everywhere from all the sets that seem to be printed during those eras, including with tops, like you're talking about, like all of the Simpsons and the Teenage Ninja Mutant Turtles. You're familiar with all these tops boxes,
Yes.
and then you have like the really bad ones, like the Desert Storm that like is worth like $1. There's just endless amounts of a lot of this stuff because it was during such a boom and they printed so much cardboard everywhere. And so all of that would lead me to probably not go into Nightmare Before Christmas as any serious investment, even if I could buy it at like, $20 a box. Now, do I have 3 boxes of that back there that I got at like $10 a box? Yes, because I opened them and I think that they're cool. Do I think those boxes could be? I mean, I could look right now. I wouldn't be shocked if they were $40 now, and given the boom and lots of things. But do I think they could go to 50 or 100? Sure, because that's a price point that is not crazy. That's a price point that someone could just snap by because they think it's cool. But yeah, I would not buy a massive amount. I don't think you're going to be able to sell a ton. I think the liquidity would be an issue. And
Yes.
there's just so many plays that you can make in everywhere. Like right now, it's so easy to make money in so many things that I personally would not do it on that. Those would be like all my feelings. How do you feel about all those thoughts, Sean?
Oh, I agree 100%. It wouldn't be an investment for me. I would not take the risk unless if I had an emotional attachment to it and just wanted to own it. That would be the only way.
Yeah.
I would not go after anything that's dead.
Yeah, I think, and this is an interesting. You mentioned the playability part, that it's like the players versus the collector. Like I've had this conversation with people before who are more sort of from the Magic world, and like, well, the player base isn't in it anymore. So how's it gonna, like? Why are people gonna want to go back to it? Like, will people collect it who never played it? Sort of that question. And
You
it's
do
sort of
give me an interesting idea for a social experiment, though.
hmm,
I'm tempted to go to the market and buy up these boxes of Jihad or Vampire
hmm.
and go on YouTube and see if I can find people to play it with me, film it, upload the videos, and see if I can get them to get interest in it, and then sell the product for an exorbitant amount to them.
A little market manipulation.
That would be a fun social experiment. It would be completely unethical, but
For science, right? That's what people say.
we could even do box openings. Look at this card. Oh my God, it had 9-inch nails quoted on it. Look at this. The artwork. It's fantastic. Smell the old cardboard, right? Ah,
So I think I've got about 10 or 15 more minutes in me right now, and then I'm going to start making less and less sense.
no
But
worries.
I would certainly love to have you on again if you'd be willing in the future. I'm sure a lot of people are going to enjoy this one.
Yeah, this is fun. I'm sure you're going to get some crazy comments when the video goes live, too. There's a lot of people out there that I'm considered controversial. I will say that. The people that watch
Yes.
my videos know that. I don't know why. I don't think I'm that controversial, but whatever. It's YouTube.
Yeah. I think the Timmy Poindexter stuff, I'm sure, gets people riled.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I say. That
I say things too that like offend people, and I make enemies. People who are enemies with me, I don't know them. They hate me. I've never met them. Welcome to being online.
yeah, it's strange for me still, even after all this time. I just can't get used to it. It's weird.
Yeah.
It really is.
I had someone who thought that they were like we were like in a feud, and I didn't even know them. It
Yes,
was
they
like
do.
it
I've
was
seen
like
videos
I
directed
it was
towards
like, I
you.
literally don't know who
It's
you are.
crazy. Yeah.
And then, of course, they take that as like, "Oh, I'm just being, like, big shotting them or putting them down." It's like, "No, genuinely, like, I literally don't you're like, I don't trust me, it's not coming from an egoic place. If I'm talking I'm a small channel talking about, nerdy cardboard. This is, oh my gosh, I'm a big shot." It's the last thing I think about myself or this channel, so
Well, that's why I couldn't believe the hate I got on the Funko Pop videos. It was amazing. I'm like, this isn't I
mm,
honestly, I'm gonna say this, and I don't mean to sound rude. I thought it was common sense. I honestly did not expect those videos to do as good as they did. I'm like, well, this is
yeah.
common sense. Everyone knows this. Do I really gotta put this out? And I put it out, I'm being attacked, and I'm thinking that like it's trolls that are like just joking with me. And it's like, no, people literally want to have an honest discussion about the investment potential long term of Funko Pops. And I'm like, oh, people think that exists. It was strange.
Um, let's see what we got here. I'm starting to catch up on chat, which is good. For a while there, we were like 50 minutes behind in questions, which always happens on
Yeah.
these
Yeah,
things.
I go off on a lot of rants too.
Um, we're almost at the end of the chat, which is good because I think we're probably winding down. So if people do have questions, I'm at the end of the chat. If anyone has any like last minute questions, feel free to fire them now. Um, I do think I actually think talking about Funkos it could be interesting a little. I watched part of that video that you made on Funkos. If you could summarize, um, your general take, and do you feel that way about all the Funkos? How do you feel about the lower serialized stuff, the special exclusive, the early stuff? Is it all bad, or is it 99.9%? Where are you at with Funkos?
I don't doubt that some can be worth money in the future, but it's going to be a very few amount because the whole
Mhm.
product line just uses mass produced scarcity. Everyone's buying it. No one's taking it out of the packaging. They're buying protectors for it. They're just collecting it and watching what the secondary market does. It's the equivalent to Pez and or Beanie Babies. It's pretty much that same market 2.0. There is very little organic collectability in Funko Pops. And I know it pains a lot of people when I say that, but it's 100% truth. It's no different than what both those companies that I just mentioned did to market their products. And a lot of people seem to think that simply because it's based on a licensed property, that means it's going to stand the test of time. These markets don't work like that. We saw that with Pez. Pez was the same way. Pez was based on Star Wars. Pez was based on Disney. And if you look at the market for Pez right now, even the vintage stuff, 99% of it is in the toilet. It's in sudden decline. It's been in decline for many years. So I don't think Funko Pops are going to be any different with few exceptions. There's always going to be that one that somebody had, or they limited just the amount of quantity to the point where the right collecting base caught on to it and bought in to the point where it is going to have some value going forward. But let's be realistic. This is a product line that was ripe with manipulation simply because of the way it was produced and the manufacturer that produces it.
Mm.
And unfortunately, I hate to say this, I am going to go there. I always hate to say what I'm about to say. It's very controversial. I'm not trying to offend anybody, but I truly believe most of the collector base for Funko Pops that is trying to invest in this stuff, they're very naive. Not all of them, but a lot of them are very naive compared to other collecting markets. And
Mm.
if they would just take the time to go back and study these markets, read some of the books that I recommend on my channel, they would see the writing is right there. It's literally right there.
So what Can you give a quick rundown of what makes something organically collectible versus not organically collectible? When you say
Oh,
that
absolutely.
these are not, and when you say that something like Pokemon or some of these comic books are, what do you mean?
Sure.
Because I think
Okay.
that'd be difficult for people.
Absolutely. Well, let's go. I can look at multiple collecting markets by doing this, but let's stick to pop culture because that's
Please.
what everybody seems to be into on this channel, right?
This is definitely a pop culture channel for sure.
If we go back to 1938, when Action Comics 1 and Detective Comics 27 hit newsstands, everybody was worried what the Nazis were doing in World War II. It was right about that time. A couple of years, Pearl Harbor would hit. Nobody was looking at comic books as investments.
Mhm.
So if somebody went to the newsstand and saw a Action Comics 1 with this quirky character that looks like Superman on the cover, and they took it home and they read it, what did they do after they read it?
Mm.
They either threw it away or they threw it in a stack of other magazines, comic books on the side. They never coveted it. It
Mm.
wasn't once bought as an investment. That's a prime example of organic collectability. I can give you some more examples of the modern era. Let's look at Magic the Gathering. Alpha Edition Magic the Gathering hits the market in 1993.
Mm.
Wizards of the Coast at the time was a small company. They were not affiliated with Hasbro at this particular time. They wanted to play test this particular product. They would invite people to come and play test this particular product. And they would literally, people could either walk away with the cards, people could leave the cards on the table. These were Alpha Edition Magic the Gathering cards. No one, very few people bothered to pick them up
Mhm.
and take them with them. Why
Mhm.
is that? Nobody thought Magic the Gathering would catch on.
Mhm.
We go back to even the 1980s, 1990s with video games. Nintendo World Championships was huge. At the age of 12, full disclosure, there's a video out there on YouTube when Valley Forge Convention Center was a thing in Pennsylvania. You can actually see the back of my head. I am actually on one of those videos where they took a camera to the Nintendo World Championships of 1990, and you can
Mhm.
see a little young Sean Jr., getting all excited because I was there playing these games. Well, that was where they had the competitions with the Nintendo World Championships cartridges. Nintendo Power did a thing where you can get either a gray cart or a gold cartridge. No one ever thought in a million years those particular items would be worth money or collectible. I know people that literally won or got a hold of some of those cartridges and they sold them for very little. They just said, I don't want this. What is this? This isn't going to be worth anything. That's a prime example of organic collectability. That's why during this live chat, I did talk to the point where it's almost like collectibles no longer go through this paradigm where they become worthless. People aren't allowing that to happen. They're just hoarding everything.
Yeah, because I was gonna say, because like there's nothing that's organically collectible by that definition right now,
Pretty
right?
much
So why single out Funko Pops over modern anything, any
because the way
card?
the way they're marketed, there
Yeah.
never was a chance for there to be any organic collectability in that product line. It's
So
almost like
you think the some of the vintage organic collectability, like in Pokemon, will make the modern stuff more collectible in the long run than any Funko Pop ever will be.
correct. Correct. It's
Interesting.
just like Lego. Right now, the whole Lego speculator market is insane. I make a lot of money in the Lego secondary market with speculating on some of these new sets.
Hmm.
The thing about Lego, though, if we go back to the 1980s, like I grew up with Lego, I love the space theme. The vintage space theme was one of my favorites. People actually open them up and they put them together. Lego has organic collectability. So today I get there's guys my age that are in that market and they just love Lego. I fully understand, even if they're not opening the package.
Mhm.
Funko Pops never had a chance to develop any of that. Funko Pops hit the scene. Everyone was like, oh, there's a secondary market. Let's keep them sealed. Everything just remained factory sealed. I have never encountered anybody that has an open Funko Pop unless if it was open due to damage or or there probably is somebody crazy out there that just likes that particular theme or that particular Funko Pop, opened it up and put it on their shelf. For the most part, they're all factory sealed. That's the very definition of mass produced scarcity.
Yeah, I just, I feel sort of like I think it's an interesting argument that sort of the natural attrition of the vintage Pokemon will somehow make the modern Pokemon more legitimate in the long run, even if there's zero attrition on that. Because like you look at the modern chase cards and they all have like 5,000, 10,000 graded, right? Some 50,000 graded, right? So like I guess I just feel that um to specifically say that Funko Pops are, in my mind, they're basically connecting with all these popular IPs. And Funko Pop is sort of like if Funko Pop succeeds, it'll be because Funko Pops themselves are important to a lot of people. Like it's not just the IPs, because you can collect those IPs in other types of toys and other types of collectibles, but why collect it in the Funko Pop? It's like, well, I'm a big fan of Pokemon and I want Pokemon stuff. Do I want to get the video games? Do I want to get the cards, or do I want to get the Funko Pop? So why the Funko Pop? And I do think the Funko Pop has to compete with these other sorts of things, but I
Correct.
do think there are I'm definitely not an expert or super knowledgeable about Funko Pops, but I do think that, people who collect toys or who collect figurines may actually like them legitimately, and some of the rare ones might sustain collectability because I think the
Oh, I
IPs
don't
will be
doubt that.
strong. I really don't know. Or it's
No, I
just
don't
like
doubt that. I
or they just are way overprinting them. There are too many, and it's crazy speculative. I'm definitely not super into that market.
here's here's the
Yeah,
problem that I have with a lot of these Funko Pop investors.
yeah,
This is an argument that they pose to me, and I always turn it around on them. They'll
yeah,
say to me, "Well, son, you have to understand, some of these are gonna be worth money in the future. I don't dispute that. But
yeah,
how are they gonna be able to predict which ones are gonna be the ones that are worth money and which ones aren't?" If you look at most of these collectors of Funko Pops, they literally have hundreds of these things that they're spending
yeah.
all this money on. Even if 97% of them go down in value or even stay at the same price, and 3 go up in value out of that collection, just due
Mhm.
to opportunity cost alone, time value
Oh,
of money,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I hate to say it, they lost their proverbial ass, and they don't
Yeah,
even realize.
just say it's a good investment, or yeah, I also think, like, I think toys are an interesting collectible category, and I comparing it to it's also the amount of space this stuff takes versus like there are different things about it that I think are make it more difficult, way more difficult to collect in mass. I do think that, it's like anything else, though. I would say, Sean, like, the first appearance of Spider-Man Funko Pop, that there was only 20. You know what I mean?
Insane,
It's
bro.
like, but again, but what's the price of that? Because if that Funko Pop is $50, maybe kind of cool. If that's $5,000 or $10,000, and I could buy something else, it's all, for me. It's more about that. It's like, um, now, is somewhere down the line, like, when there's so many serialized stuff and there's so many serialized stuff from different categories, what's going to differentiate all the serialized stuff, like these types of things. I do think it's hard to predict, but I guess, people are paying so much money, right? For, like, you look at, like, I think, like, Luka Doncic rookie, like, Logo Man. I don't remember the exact price, but it was definitely in the millions, like multiple millions, right? Something like that. So you have these. There are people today who are speculating on, or they just have a lot of money in their collectors, maybe. I don't know, but are speculating potentially on, first of all, his career, right, being popular, but then also, like, the one of one serialized era is going to be, like, majorly significant. And at those price points, I think it's an extremely stupid bet. Um, but there would be price points where I do think it's a good bet, where I do think that there's some serious potential value and chase and excitement in serialized stuff. And I'm not sure it's all just BS, and kind of, and you're not saying this, but I feel
No,
like there can be this sort of, like, unless it's natural attrition and it was mass produced and a lot of people got to own it and have relationships with it, unless it has that, it cannot be extremely valuable. And
Correct.
and you know, I mean, even with something like the Honus Wagner, right? The Honus Wagner, it wasn't the attrition that made that extremely valuable. It was the fact that it was extremely low print run because they got destroyed by the factory because he didn't want to be,
His
you
name
know,
associated
yeah,
with
the
tobacco.
tobacco, right? Which in some sense is like serializing it. I know there aren't actual serial numbers on it, but it makes it just because something doesn't if something is rare, does it really matter that much if it's attrition, if it's based on that attrition rarity, or if it's based on actually just being printed by the manufacturer as rare, as long as it still is historic and important
And
for
relevant,
and
culturally
relevant.
relevant,
Yeah,
relevant.
I guess I think that it may not matter that much. Now, clearly, if you can have both, it's great because if you can have an Action Comics #1 that so many people actually read and engaged with and had that nostalgia, and it's just ridiculously rare, it's like it's this amazing win-win. But it's just I don't see that happening for anything ever, like at least for the foreseeable future, because the only reason that was ever able to happen is because people just like didn't at all speculate on things in like in the same way they do today. It would just have to be such a different marketplace for there to be something so massive. I guess it could be from something that is like at the time not that massive and then like later becomes a historic IP or an historic character like Superman. I don't know. But certainly interesting, I think.
It is. But what are the chances of that happening too?
Yeah, and for, like, everyone to, like, miss it, but somehow something's super popular, but no one's investing or speculating in it, it's like, look at Lorcana. The amount of, like, investor speculator hype around something that, like, there's, like, 0 chance of that, at least out of the gate, having, like, any sort of natural attrition or. Now, could it be that there's a big boom and fad, and then it dies down, and then a lot of it the problem is the grading, though. It's like with Pokemon, there was that huge boom and people did keep it for a while, but then eventually it got thrown out by people's parents. Eventually people kind of moved on. And originally it was sleeved and taken care of, but eventually it got destroyed. But if all those cards were graded by kids or a lot of adults were grading those, would it have been able to have the same attrition? I don't know. These are the things I think about.
Fair assessment.
Um, let's see. Um, all right. I think we should probably end it there. I'm not seeing any other specific questions. I do want to just thank you so much for coming on.
Oh,
Uh,
anytime. Yeah, I felt bad. The last time I was here, I had to cut it short, if you remember.
I remember you saying that. I still appreciated how long you spent. It didn't feel, like were cutting it super short to me. But I appreciate making the effort and coming on and giving your time to all these people here. If you guys can go, please subscribe to Sean's channel so that he, to help him out and to show your appreciation for what he continues to do. I would appreciate that. Yeah, I think having Sean and having people who are experienced and older and who are actually nuanced and sharing reasonable sort of balanced opinions is so vital and like it's like there's not enough of it in the space. So I think particularly talking broadly, I'm very interested in all of the collectible categories that you talk about. I love that stuff. I know a lot of people are just sort of interested in the pop culture, but
Yes,
um
yes.
I'm kind of a fan of it all. So anyway, but I will leave the floor for you for a second if you want to say anything to the audience or if you want to touch on a topic or anything, and then we'll close it out for tonight.
No, I just want to say thank you to you and your audience for having me. I really do appreciate the chance to at least interact with other collectors. I always enjoy that. That's really what the hobby's about, I'll be honest. And especially with me, I don't have much like technical experience. Like you could tell the way that I shoot my videos is pretty much like I'm sitting here and I look at myself on camera and it's like, wow, I'm under like bright lights and I look like really awkward on camera. I've always thought that. I don't know what it is. It's just something like that. It's weird. So I don't have much technical knowledge. Like I don't use filters or anything on my particular YouTube channel.
Sure.
So it's always good, like when you guys bring up like Discord or other things happening online that I may not be aware of. I really appreciate because again,
Well,
I'm 46. I'm closer to 50 than I am to 40. So
I'm gonna follow up with you, and we're gonna get you in the Discord. I think there are a number of people in there who've been wanting me to have you back on for a while. So you've got some fans in there who have been watching your content for years and like really appreciate it. Um, so I think that would be cool if you'd be open to it. We also do, and I can talk to you more about this. Another time we have a Patreon where we have people on to present,
okay.
and so that could be an option too if people want that in the future. Maybe to kind of hire you to do a presentation on something in the collectible space. We can talk more about that off camera and in the future, as I'm sure you would make a good guest for that. So anyway, thank you, Sean. Thank you, everyone who has been tuning in with us for these 3 hours. Managed to have 100 to 200 people the entire time. So we appreciate you engaging, commenting, and all that good stuff. Definitely, if you feel like it, please subscribe to my channel and support me on Patreon as well. Dan and I really appreciate the support, as I always say, and we'll have more content for you guys soon. All right,
Thank you so
everyone,
much.
have a good night.